Good evening, and welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting into the deep waters of Greek mythology. As always, drop a note in the comments and tell me where you're listening from. Get comfortable, breathe out the day, and let's begin at the very beginning. Before mountains or oceans, before Olympus or stars, there was only chaos. Not chaos like a messy room or a frantic day. Older than language, older than rhythm or rule, chaos was a yawning openness, a vast, directionless void. It wasn't wicked or kind or even neutral. It just existed, empty, gaping, patient. From that emptiness, the first shapes of reality stirred and took root. Out of chaos came Gaia earth-wide and enduring. Tartarus, the unfathomable chasm beneath the earth, deep and terrifying. And Eros, the primeval force of attraction and desire, the pull that binds, the urgency that draws things together and makes new things possible. These weren't gods, as you and I might picture, not yet. They were essences with form, truths that learned how to breathe. Then came Nyx's night wrapped in shadows so complete that even chaos recoiled at the richness of her dark. Nyx was followed by Erebus, the ancient darkness between worlds, the shadow of the underworld itself. In that early stillness, night and darkness lay side by side. From their union came ether, the bright upper air the gods would one day breathe, and Hemera, the day, fated forever to chase her mother's retreat across the sky. And just like that, not through equations or weather patterns, but through story, night followed day, and day followed night, an elegant, endless loop stitched by a family of invisible powers. Gaia, the earth, did not sleep. She was patient, fertile, and full of possibility. From herself, she called forth Uranus, the sky vast, jeweled with stars, at once her son and her consort. When he stretched himself across her, the world took its first outline, a high, domed sky arched above a sprawling green plain. Gaia gave rise to the mountains, sudden and wild, and to Pontus, the sea, moody and willful, long before any sail cut his waves or any beast churned his depths. Earth and sky became the first great pair, and their union brought forth the Titans, the first generation of ruling powers, a dynasty long before Zeus had a thunderbolt to summon. There were 12 in all. 6 sons, 6 daughters, each as immense and elemental as the world itself. Oceanus, the encircling river that wrapped the earth in a shining band. Hyperion, Lord of Light. Cus, the questing mind, ever inquiring. Crius, who bore the constellations on his shoulders. Iapetus, ancestor of mortals. And Cronus, the youngest patient, watchful, and shrewd. Among the daughters, Thea, bright mother of sun and moon. Rhea, destined to be mother of gods. Themis, living law and right order. Memory herself, keeper of all things said and done. Phoebe, clear and radiant. And Tethys, the nourishing sea. But Gaia's womb did not stop with noble children. She bore the monstrous, too, the kind of strength the world is never sure what to do with. First came the Cyclopes, Brontes, Sterops, and Arge's one-eyed smiths, whose single blazing eyes shone like the hearth of a forge. They were blunt, strong, fearless, and they hammered storms into being. Then came the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed 3 giants, each with 50 heads and 100 arms. They were storms in flesh, earthquakes given bodies, impossible to contain, terrifying to behold. Uranus, lord of the sky, trembled at the sight of his own monstrous sons. Ashamed, frightened, he forced them back into Gaia's depths, cramming them into the hollows of the earth, shoving them down beneath layers of stone and anguish. Gaia groaned. Imagine the whole world trying to breathe with a mountain on its chest. She felt the weight of their imprisonment, the ache of betrayal, and the slow, hot bloom of rage. Pain sharpened into purpose. In the dark of her body, Gaia formed a weapon, Not bronze or iron. Those crafts had yet to be dreamed, but a great flint sickle, jagged and merciless, honed on the whetstone of her fury. She summoned her Titan sons and told them plainly, "Your father has wronged me. He has chained your brothers. He presses me down night after night and silences the womb that bore you. Who will help me?" One by one, the Titans stepped back, afraid of Uranus's vast power. Only Cronus, the youngest, eyes watchful, heart steady, stepped forward. "I will," he said. "Give me the blade." Gaia laid the snare. When Uranus came down, spreading stars and silence across her body, Cronus sprang from the shadows and drove the sickle down. The sky split with Uranus's cry. Cronus severed the source of his father's power and tossed the bloodied flesh into the sea. From the froth that rose where it fell, something new shimmered into being. Aphrodite love and desire made flesh terrible and beautiful at once. She drifted ashore at Cyprus, radiant, serene, untouched by the violence that birthed her. But blood is a seed. From the drops that struck the earth sprang the Erinyes, the Furies' veils of night and relentless justice, who hound oath-breakers and kinslayers. Giants rose, too, towering and fierce, and the Malaya, nymphs of the ash tree, watchful spirits of the rugged wild. Uranus, broken, retreated to the heights. Before he vanished, he sent a curse ringing through time like a bell. As I was overthrown by my son, so shall he be overthrown by his. It wasn't a new idea. Gaia had already whispered it, but once spoken, it wouldn't stop echoing. Cronus took the throne and wrapped himself in authority. He freed his mother from torment, unbarred his siblings from the earth, and ushered in a calmer age on the surface. But beneath his crown pulsed his father's final warning, a second heartbeat he couldn't ignore. He chose a wife as kings do. He chose Rhea, his sister, steady, wise, loving. Together they presided over a time poets later called the Golden Age. Mortals lived simply and well, untouched by winter's cruelty or war's hunger. Fields yielded fruit without plow or sweat. Justice walked unseen among villages. Doors stayed unlocked at night. A world held in warm hands. Peace, though, is a delicate thing. When Rhea began to bear children, Cronus remembered the curse, the son who would dethrone him. Fear made him ruthless. One by one, as Rhea placed the newborns in his arms, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, he opened his mouth and swallowed them whole. No wailing, no cradle, no graves. Just silence and the terrible knowledge of what he'd done. He told Rhea it was necessary. He would not repeat his father's fate, not for love, not for mercy. Rhea wept, powerless to fight him, powerless to save her children. She endured 5 births and 5 devourings. But when she felt a 6th life stir within her, she fled. She crossed the sea to rough Crete, to caves beneath Mount Ida, where shepherds sang and pines sighed. And there she gave birth in secret to her youngest, to Zeus. She swaddled the stone and handed it to Cronus with shaking hands. He swallowed it, satisfied. Under Ida's shadows, the infant Zeus was fed in secret. The Caretes warriors in bronze clanged shield to drown out his cries. Amalthea, the goat, nursed him with sweet milk. From her broken horn, the cornucopia, the horn of plenty, was born, forever pouring fruit and grain and all good things. When Amalthea died, Zeus lifted her hide into the night as a constellation, a promise in stars that he would not forget those who fed him. And Zeus grew. His eyes opened before his first breath truly finished. His hand clutched with the grip of fate. He ran the ridges, learned the secrets of wind, listened to the slow thinking of stones. The world itself seemed to teach him. At night, dreams came on the voice of Gaia. She had not finished her revenge. Her monstrous sons still sweltered in Taurus, chained by old fear, the Cyclopes, the 100-handed. Gaia whispered to Zeus not just strength, but strategy. She guided him to Midas, a titaness of wisdom whose counsel cut through tangle and pride. With her help, Zeus returned to Cronus in disguise. He poured wine sweetened and sharpened with a potion Metis prepared. The old king's stomach turned. He retched and retched until, with a shudder, he vomited up the children he had swallowed. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon full grown, shining furious. They stood together for the first time, 6 against the old order, and turned their faces toward war. The Titans charged to Cronus' side, Cus, Crius, Hyperion, Iapetus, and the rest mustering on Mount Othrys, the old seat of power. Oceanus kept apart, wise enough to sit out family fights that split the sky. The Olympians climbed the newer heights, Mount Olympus, and thunder gathered at their backs. For 10 years, the world tore itself apart. Lightning scarred the clouds. The sea threw up mountains of water and then swallowed islands whole. Volcanoes opened like eyes and bled fire. Winds howled like wolves that had learned words. Neither side could finish the other. The stalemate stretched, grinding, endless. Gaia watched. She knew the scale had to tilt. She counseled Zeus again. Free your uncles, all of them. The ones your father feared most. So Zeus broke the locks of Tartarus. Out came the Cyclopes, grateful and grim, and gifted him the thunderbolt sky and judgment captured in a fist of light. To Poseidon, they gave the trident, a spear that tamed or shattered seas. To Hades, a helm of darkness that made the wearer a rumor. The 100-handed ones rose too, each a storm of fists. They hurled mountains the way shepherds throw stones at stray sheep. With them on the field, the tide turned. Cronus fought like the memory of a storm, proud and unbending. The prophecies don't lose arguments, they keep their appointments. The Titans fell. Zeus did not kill them. He chained them, as his father had, and cast them down into Tartarus, behind gates that would never rust or break. Only a few were spared, Prometheus and Epimetheus, who had sided with the new order, and Themis, who knew justice when she saw it. The sky cleared. The raw scars of battle smoked and cooled. Zeus took the throne of the heavens, not by birthright, but by daring, by craft, and because fate had decided his name in that space. Even then, Cronus' curse hovered, thin and constant. Power is never a settled thing. Every throne in myth hums with the promise of its own undoing. With the Titans dispatched and the storm slowly dissolving, the gods faced a quieter, harder task, not to conquer, but to rule. You don't hold a world together with lightning alone. You hold it with decisions, with patience, with agreements hard won and honored. Zeus stood at the center first among equals, not by age, but by will. And yet the laws etched into the bones of the cosmos wouldn't let him hoard everything. He had 2 brothers who had bled beside him, Poseidon and Hades, each formidable in his own domain. Another war, this time between siblings, would have ripped the fresh world to pieces. So the 3 cast lots, not with bickering, not with blade and bluff, with fate. The lots fell, and the realms settled like dust. Zeus took the sky, that high blue where eagles ride and storms are born. Poseidon took the sea, restless and deep, where cities of coral rise and old monsters sleep. Hades took the underworld, the shadowed country of the dead, quiet and absolute. Earth itself Gaia remained common ground. Mountains, fields, forests, a shared stage where gods and mortals could meet, bargain, fall in love, and make mistakes. Zeus built his court on Olympus, a place more threshold than mountain cloud crowned, stormless, clean, and bright. Walls of marble and vapor, halls open to the wind. No roads led there, because none were needed. The air itself drew a line mortals could not cross. Zeus's throne of thunder stood at the summit. Near him sat Hera, not merely as wife, but as queen sharp, proud, keeper of oaths, patron of marriage, and the slow, steady justice of a woman who remembers every slight. Demeter walked often below, Everywhere her foot fell, seeds stirred. Hestia tended the eternal flame that warmed every home. New gods joined the council. Athena sprang fully armed, bronze shining from Zeus's head after he swallowed Metis, trying and failing to avoid a prophecy. Apollo and Artemis were born to Leto after a long search for sanctuary. He the sun-bright archer, singer, healer, she the moonlit huntress, fierce and spare. Ares loved the crash of war. Hephaestus loved the patience of fire and metal. Aphrodite rose from foam and caused more poems, more trouble, more cities to burn than any storm could. Hermes wore winged sandals and a smile, slid between boundaries as if they were curtains, and made himself essential in one long afternoon. This new age glittered, ambitious and flawed. They loved. They fought. They helped mortal strangers for reasons even they couldn't always name. The Titans were gone. The world was not at peace is never a permanent setting, but it had shape now. A sky, a sea, a deep place where the dead go. And above it all, a court of gods as human as we are and bigger than we can stand. When the thunder faded and Olympus settled into its gleaming routine, the world below was still mostly wild. No cities. No plows biting soil at dawn. No lamps pushing back the night. The gods could dine on ambrosia forever, but the earth felt strangely quiet without voices to sing under the stars. That's where a Titan stepped forward, not a schemer like Cronus, not a brute like the hundred-handed, but a thinker with eyes that always looked 2 steps ahead. Prometheus. Prometheus, forethought, had chosen Zeus's side during the war, not out of loyalty, but out of clarity. He could read the wind of history. He also had a soft spot for mortals, for the fragile, upright creatures he claimed a hand in shaping. Some stories say he sculpted people from river clay, smoothing limbs with careful thumbs and breathing a fine spark into their lungs. Others say he simply taught them to stand like gods stand faces to the sky, thoughts reaching past hunger. However it happened, humans appeared, soft-skinned, slow, lacking claws, fangs, fur, or the instincts that make survival easy. Beautiful in their way, but underprepared. Prometheus asked Zeus to give them a gift, something to narrow the distance between human frailty and a dangerous world. Zeus refused. He had only just seated himself on the throne. He could smell the old curse still hanging in the air, a father dethroned by a son, a king becoming someone else's past tense. Why risk empowering creatures who might one day forget their place? Keep them cold. Keep them afraid. Keep the front door locked. Prometheus did what stubborn, compassionate people do when power says no. He found another way. He climbed to the bright forges of Hephaestus, where sparks danced like fireflies and iron sang. He stole a living ember and carried it down the mountainside, hidden in a fennel stalk, a smoldering heart cradled in a green sleeve. He gave fire to humanity. Imagine that first night, a ring of light in the dark, the way faces glow orange, the way stories suddenly have a place to gather. With a single ember, everything changed warmth against winter. Cooked food, stronger bodies, tempered tools, hard metal, soft bread, clay pots, kill bricks, and the strange alchemy of language and thought that always blooms when people sit close and share heat. Fire taught us to plan. It taught us to stay. Zeus found out. He always does. His anger didn't fall like a moment. It sprawled like a policy. To punish mortals, he asked the gods to craft a gift, a perfect trap wrapped in silk and smiles. Hephaestus shaped her from clay. Athena dressed her in gleam and grace. Aphrodite gave allure. Hermes added curiosity and a quicksilver mind. They called her Pandora all-gifted and sent her down with a sealed jar. Later ages call it a box. The older stories say jar. Either way, it held the things you don't want loose. Prometheus warned his brother, Epimetheus, afterthought, not to accept gifts from Zeus. But Epimetheus is the kind of man who reads the terms after clicking agree. He took Pandora in, fell for her, and one day she lifted the lid. Out swarmed the human condition. Sickness and sorrow, envy and madness, grinding toil in the thin, cold hands of age. Hope stayed behind, caught at the lip, or deliberately left, depending on how dark a poet you ask. From then on, humanity had more than fire. It had stakes. Prometheus's compassion had met Zeus's pride, and the result was a world with light and shadows. As for Prometheus, the king of the gods saved his worst for the Titan who had embarrassed him. He chained Prometheus to a rock at the edge of the world. Some said the Caucasus, bound in unbreakable links. Every day an eagle came to feed on his liver. Every night it grew back, and the punishment began again. He was immortal. The agony could not kill him. He endured. Not silent, not meek endured. People lit their hearths and told his story, and in telling it, learned how deeply the price of progress cuts. Zeus did not finish there. He had another problem. The world needed order, so the gods began to arrange it. They created the first generation of mortal kings and gave them laws that smelled like smoke from a new hearth sharp, comforting and dangerous if mishandled. But even good order wears a stern face when you're on the wrong side of it. So the poets spoke of ages, a slow slide from ease to effort. Hesiod, farmer, poet, realist, laid out 5 eras. First came the Golden Age in Cronus' time, when mortals lived like gods. No labor, no sorrow, death like sleep, and afterward, a quiet dignity as guardians of justice, gentle presences moving unseen. But Cronus fell, and the Silver Age rose long childhoods, short tempers, little reverence. They ignored the gods, and Zeus swept them away. Bronze came next, men as hard as their tools, houses clanging with metal, hearts beating in time with war drums. They loved fighting and left little behind, but dense in the earth. Then a brief flare of greatness, the heroic age. Heracles, Perseus, Theseus, Atalanta, Jason, Achilles, Odysseus, names that still run on the tongue like flint and wine. Some were rewarded with the Isles of the Blessed. Most were folded into song. And finally, Iron Hesiod's present, and, he says, ours. Work from gray dawn to darker dusk. Neighbors suspicious. Oaths cheap. Winter long. In a good year, you survive and thank your gods. In a bad year, you blame them. It's tempting to argue with Hesiod, to insist we're better off now. But his point wasn't nostalgia. It was clarity. Peace, comfort, decency, all of it requires attention. Turn away, and the weeds come back. Even as humans learned to bake bread and bury their dead with coins for the ferryman, the gods kept stepping into the story, weaving light into the edges. Some births were not like the others. Take Athena. Zeus feared a prophecy that the child Metis carried would outmatch him. He swallowed Metis' wisdom and jested. Problem solved, he thought. Later, a pain like a thunderclap split his skull. With a shout and a swing of Hephaestus' hammer, out sprang Athena grown, armored, with eyes like daylight over bronze. Wisdom doesn't stay buried. It arrives when it's ready, fully formed, and unwilling to be ignored. The court on Olympus gathered strength and personality. Hera's crown wasn't a wedding ring. It was jurisdiction marriage, sovereignty. The fierce dignity of keeping vows in a world where power treats promises like feathers. Demeter's presence made the fields generous, but the balance of her love would one day write winter across the world. Hestia's fire quiet, steady meant every home, however poor, could be a temple if it kept aflame. Poseidon learned to grumble in deep syllables, the sea speaking in moods. Hades ruled the one kingdom that never rebels, the honest dark where all accounts are eventually settled. Then came the twins, Apollo and Artemis, children of Leto, born on a floating island that became still when it welcomed them. Apollo, music, medicine, prophecy, plague, sunlight, perfection with edges. Artemis, night paths, the cry of deer, the hush of snow, moonlight on a knife. Ares arrived, two blood and chaos personified loud where Athena was precise. Hephaestus dragged a tired leg and carried a bright mind, making palaces and wonders from soot and sweat. Aphrodite rose radiant from foam and made kings foolish with a glance. Hermes, with his laughing mouth and quick hands, became indispensable before anyone realized he was in the room. But the age of Olympus was never just a roster of gods. It was a crowded crossroads where divine choices hit human skin. And those humans began to matter, not as props for immortal drama, but as protagonists. The first to step sharply into focus was a boy fated to grow into a storm, Perseus. His story doesn't start with a sword. It starts with a lock and a warning. Acrisius, king of Argos, heard an oracle. His grandson would kill him. He locked his daughter, Danae, in a bronze room deep underground. But the gods don't respect padlocks. Zeus came to her not as a man, but as a shimmering rain of gold. Perseus was conceived. When Acrisius found the child, he didn't dare stain his hands with royal blood. He set mother and infant adrift in a wooden chest, trusting the sea to do what he wouldn't. The sea, as ever, had ideas of its own. The chest washed ashore on Seriphos, where a fisherman named Dictys opened it and chose kindness. He raised Perseus like a son. The boy became strong without becoming cruel, proud without becoming brittle. Unfortunately, good men draw the attention of bad kings. Polydex, ruler of Seriphos, wanted Danae. Perseus stood in the way. So Polydex devised a clever cruelty. He demanded gifts from the islanders, and Perseus, poor but brave, boasted he'd bring back the head of Medusa, the only mortal Gorgon, whose gaze turned living flesh to stone. Most boasts curdle. This one ripened. The gods took an interest. Athena lent Perseus a mirror-bright shield, polished so clean he could look without being seen. Hermes offered a curved blade and directions to the Graeae, three ancient sisters who shared one eye and one tooth between them. With a thief's timing, Perseus snatched the eye mid-hand off and bargained for knowledge, where to find the nymphs whose gifts he'd need. They gave him winged sandals, a cap of invisibility, and a sack that could hold what no sane man should carry. He flew to the edge of the world, to a garden of statues that had once been men. Medusa slept among her immortal sisters. Perseus moved backward, watching only the shield, one clean swing. Silence after. From Medusa's blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a warrior gleaming like coin. The sisters shrieked. Perseus vanished under Hades' helm and rose into air. On the long flight home, he saw a girl chained to a rock. Andromeda offered to a sea monster to pay for her parents' arrogance. He ended that story with a flash of the Gorgon's headstone, where terror had been, and unchained the girl. He didn't trade. He didn't negotiate. He rescued. He brought her with him, and love was simple for once. Back on Seriphos, Polydex sneered until he didn't. Perseus pulled back the sack's mouth. Stone spread like a rumor through a court that had laughed too easily. Dictys took the throne, a good man in a bad building, and justice felt like fresh air. Later, a stray discus at funeral games arced and struck an old man. Acrisius. The prophecy had trailed Perseus across the sea and through years, and it found him not in malice, but in the indifferent way fate keeps time. The circle closed. The story moved on. Perseus' bloodline would wind its way toward the greatest of the old heroes, the one whose name is still shorthand for impossible labor, Heracles. But his chapter comes later. For now, the world had received fire, curses, hope, and the first taste of what moral courage looks like when it meets divine attention. Up on Olympus, Zeus felt the weight of ruling settle into habit. He learned when to throw lightning and when to wait. Here his patience thinned and thickened like seasons. Demeter's love would soon be tested and teach the earth to grieve and bloom. And somewhere under a harsh blue sky, the first plow bit dirt and the first song reached further than the throat that sang it. If Perseus lit the path, Heracles thundered down it. His name still sounds like a drum, Heracles. Glory of Hera. A bitter joke the poets never tire of repeating, because Hera fought him from cradle to pyre. He's the great-grandson of Perseus, a prince by birth and a laborer by fate, stretched between laughter and grief like a bowstring. His beginning is a trick of time. Zeus, restless as always, set his eyes on Alcmene, wife of Amphitryon of Thebes. Taking Amphitrion's shape, Zeus lengthened one night into three, a small act of divinity with a large consequence. From that visit came Heracles. From Amphitryon, the next night, came Iphicles, a twin without lightning in his veins. Hera saw it seems she always sees, and her anger folded itself into a plan. While the baby slept, she sent 2 serpents to the cradle. The nurse's scream came too late. The infants were already playing with the snakes as if they were toys. Heracles choked them to stillness, one in each fist. The rumor of that moment spread like smoke. Strength had arrived. He grew bright and unruly, the kind of student who breaks a lyre with his grip and apologizes after. He learned archery, boxing, chariot driving, and music. He learned more from doing than listening. As a young man, he stood head and shoulders above others. The world loves that kind of height until it casts a shadow. Kings noticed. Wars found him. In Thebes, he fought and won, and was given Megara, daughter of King Creon, as his bride. For a time, he was content home, children, a hearth he could lift with one hand and never would. Hera waited. Madness is a divine weapon in Greek myth, quick and devastating. One afternoon, the hero's eyesight seemed to tilt. The walls of his house leaned in. He raged through his own rooms and slew the ones he loved, the wife he had been gentle with, the children who laughed when he came through the door. When the fog cleared, the world had turned to ash. It is one of the oldest, hardest scenes. A man of incomparable strength kneeling in the wreckage of his own life, asking for a punishment that could double as redemption. He went to Delphi. The Pythia, voice of Apollo, spoke. Serve King Eurystheus of Tyrants. Do what he demands. Endure. There was no crown at the end of this, no prize, but a chance to be clean again. So Heracles bent his neck to a small man's will, and the great ledger of his labors began. The Nemean lion. Its hide turned blades like rain. Its breath stank of graves. Heracles cornered it in a cave, blocked a second exit with boulders, grappled the beast, and crushed its throat. He skinned it with its own claw and wore the pelt thereafter, a second invulnerable skin draped over a first that had never been safe. The Lernaean Hydra. 9 heads lashed from a swamp, and each severed neck sprouted 2 more. With his nephew Iolaus at his side, Heracles cut, and Iolaus seared the stumps with a burning brand. The final head was immortal. He buried it under a rock and dipped his arrows in its black blood. From then on, every wound he dealt carried a second sting. The Cyrenian hind. A deer with golden antlers, sacred to Artemis, swifter than wind and protected by a goddess's temper. Heracles chased it for a year without sleeping in the same place twice, snared it without spilling blood, and carried it away. Artemis arrived with straight shoulders and a sharp voice. He explained, and she allowed the capture, stern as winter granting a brief thaw. The Erymanthian boar. It raged across snow-crusted slopes, all tusks and snort. Heracles harried it up into drifts and bound it in chains. When he brought it to tyrants, Eurystheus dove into a bronze jar and clanged the lid in panic. The strongest man alive grinned for the first time in months. The Augean stables. Years of filth from countless cattle. A king's pride layered into stench. Heracles rerouted 2 rivers through the stalls and scoured them clean in a single day. Cleverness is a kind of strength, and he was learning to flex it. The Stymphalian birds. Man-eaters with bronze beaks and razored feathers. With Athena's rattling crotala in hand, he startled them into flight and shot them down against a winter sky. the air briefly full of metal and feathers. The Cretan bull. Born from Poseidon's will and palace lies, the bull had fire in its eyes and the sea in its breath. Heracles wrestled it to earth, muscles humming, and hauled it north alive. The mores of Diomedes. Horses trained on human flesh. He turned their hunger back on their master, fed Diomedes to his own steeds, and gentled the mores on what mercy remained. The girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, fearless with a calm that drew respect. She offered the girdle freely at first, but Hera sowed rumors and battle broke like glass. In the confusion and blood, Heracles took the belt and left the beach wind-scoured and quiet, the cattle of Geryon. At the world's red edge, where sunset paints everything with finality, Geryon stood triple-bodied, watched by a two-headed hound and a herdsman with a hard stare. Heracles cut them all down and drove the red cattle home, raising stone pillars at the straits as mile markers for gods and men. Eurystheus tried to cheat. He tossed out the Hydra when Iolaus had helped, and the stables, the rivers, did the work. He said, 2 more tasks were laid on the pile. The apples of the Hesperides, golden fruit guarded by nymphs and a dragon that coiled the tree like a living chain. Heracles sought out Atlas, the sky-bearer, and offered a bargain. I'll shoulder the heavens if you fetch the apples. Atlas, relieved of his eternal weight, moved like a young man, came back with the fruit, and then predictably hesitated to resume his burden. Hold the sky just a moment while I adjust my cloak, Heracles said, smiling with his shoulders. Atlas lifted, and Heracles walked away, apples in hand. With again, not only brawn. Cerberus, no blades, no tricks. Go down to Hades, ask permission, and bring back the 3-headed hound that keeps the dead where they belong. He went by way of caves and rites, spoke to Persephone and Hades, gripped the dog by the throats, endured the venom of its tail, and hauled it up to daylight, then returned it, because the underworld's order is not to be played with. Some victories are alone. Redemption earned, the sentence served. Heracles stepped back into his life, but life did not step aside. He fought wars he hadn't started. He loved and was loved, roughly and often. He bore the contradictions of being half divine and fully exposed to suffering. He married Deianira, man-destroyer, a name that reads like a warning label, and tried to settle. On a riverbank, the centaur Nessus offered to carry Deianira across, then tried to take her by force. Heracles' arrow, poisoned with Hydra's blood, burned through the centaur. Dying, Nessus spun a last lie. His blood, he told Deianira, would keep her husband faithful if she wove it into a garment. Later, when jealous fear gnawed her, she sent Heracles a tunic anointed with that dark charm. He put it on. The poison woke with heat and chewed its way into his skin. No water soothed it. No blade could peel it off without peeling him away. He built his own pyre on Mount Oda, climbed atop it, and asked a passer-by to light the wood. The shepherd Philoctetes, simple, brave, did what no friend could bear to do. In return, he was given Heracles' bow, the one set aside for a later war, a later hero. The flames took the man. The gods took the rest. Zeus brought his son to Olympus, where even Hera set down her anger and placed a crown on the brow she had tried to break. Heracles married Hebe, goddess of youth. In death he became a god not against his will, but beyond it. Strength refined into something that no longer needs to prove itself. His story didn't end at the pyre. It ran like a river through other lives. His arrows would decide battles decades later. His name would become a yardstick for impossible jobs and stubborn hope. And his art crime, remorse, labor, grace would become the pattern Greek heroes either tried to imitate or could not escape. But not all heroism looks like a mountain being lifted. Some of it looks like city building, lawmaking, politics, and the daily courage of running toward problems people have been walking around for years. For that, Greece had Theseus. He too was born of a double lineage, Aegeus of Athens on one side, Poseidon on the other, depending on which bard you trust. His mother Aethra hid a sword and sandals under a heavy stone at Aegeus's request. "When our boy is strong enough to lift this," the king said, "send him to me." Years later, a teenage Theseus heaved the slab aside, took up the tokens, and chose the hard road to Athens, the land route, full of ambush and men who had turned cruelty into a profession. He met the bandits where they kept their trophies, Periphetes, who clubbed travelers, Cines, who bent pine trees and turned bodies into torn flags, Siren, who forced washing and then kicked people over a cliff into a turtle's mouth, Circean, a wrestler who mistook brutality for skill, Procrustes, who made beds fit by cutting or stretching strangers to match. Theseus beat each one at his own game and left the road cleaner than he found it. It was heroic housekeeping, and it mattered. Athens did not greet him with trumpets. Medea, sorceress and now Aegeus a consort, saw a threat in the boy and urged poison. The cup tilted. The sword flashed. Aegeus recognized his son's blade just in time. Joy, relief, embrace. And then a bigger grief heaved into view. Crete. Years before, Athens had lost the war to King Minos of Crete and was paying for it with blood. Every cycle, 7 youths and 7 maidens sent to feed a monster in a labyrinth beneath Knossos the Minotaur, born from a king's pride and a god's punishing wit. Theseus volunteered to go, not as tribute, but as answer. In Crete, Ariadne, Minos' daughter, saw him and felt something that swung like a door into destiny. She gave him a thread, a plan, and a promise. He went in, found the monster in the stone maze where air smelled old and turns doubled back on themselves, fought it in the dark, and walked the thread back to light. They fled together. At Naxos, love collapsed under the weight of choices. Some say Dionysus claimed Ariadne there, gently and forever. Others say Theseus left her to protect a future Athens would accept. Either way, she woke alone, and the Aegean learned a new kind of salt. Sailing home, Theseus forgot to swap his ship's black sails for white, the agreed signal to his father that he was alive. Aegeus, watching from the cliffs, saw morning where hope should be, and threw himself into the sea that now bears his name. Tragedy braided itself into victory again, tight as rope. As king, Theseus wasn't done. He united Attica's scattered towns under Athens, not by tyranny, but by organizing, feasting, persuading by founding rituals that turned neighbors into citizens. He established games, laws, and temples. He still found time to step into other myths, alongside Heracles against the Amazons. Down into Hades with his friend Pirithous, which ended badly. Pirithous stuck in stone. Theseus glued to the chair of forgetfulness until Heracles yanked him free. That brush with the underworld changed him. In the end, politics soured, as politics will. Factions rose. A king who had once been a solution became a problem. Exiled to Skyros, Theseus died not in battle, but in the shove of a king's jealousy, a fall off a cliff. Athens brought his bones home later and honored him. Cities forget. Cities remember. They are excellent at both. Between Heracles' mountain-sized tasks and Theseus' civic courage, Greece found 2 poles for the word hero. And between those poles, one more kind of hero stepped forward, not a city builder, not a strong man, but a voyager who dared to make a crew out of rivals and a ship out of prophecy. Jason. His story begins with a stolen throne. His father's brother, Peleus, had seized power in Iolcus. An oracle warned him to beware a man with one sandal. Jason, raised in the wild by the wise centaur Chiron, arrived a man, and, after carrying an old woman, Hera in disguise, across a river, lost a sandal in the mud. Peleus swallowed his fear and smiled. "Fetch me the golden fleece from Colchis," he said. "Bring back that impossible prize, and I will step aside." Jason called for help, and heroes answered. 50 in all. Heracles for a time, Orpheus with a song that could steer winds, Atalanta swift and precise, Castor and Polydeuces, the Boreads with their storm-born wings, Theseus in some tellings, and others whose names fit like pebbles in a jar. They boarded the Argo, a ship built by Argus with Athena's guidance and a speaking beam of Dodonna's oak set in her prow. The ship could whisper omens. The sea could refuse them, but it would have to listen first. They sailed into chapters. Lemnos, an island of women and delay. Thrace, where they freed blind Phineus from harpies and learned how to slip between the clashing rocks. Send a dove first. Watch its tail feathers. Row like your name depends on it. It did. In Colchis, King Aed smiled a knife smile and offered conditions instead of refusal. Yoke fire-breathing bulls. Plow a field with them. Sow dragon's teeth. Kill the armed men who sprout from the earth. Jason would have died there if not for Medea Aed's daughter, priestess of Hecate, scholar of herbs and night, struck by love's arrow and angry at the god who shot it. She gave Jason a stab against flame, a tactic for the earthborn warriors. Throw a stone between them and let suspicion do what sharp steel often does, and a path to the sleepless dragon. She sang it to sleep. He took the fleece gold and soft as sunlight held in a hand and fled with her into the dark. Ates pursued. Medea did what love and desperation sometimes require and what regret always remembers. She killed her young brother, Apsyrus, scattered his pieces in the sea, and made a funeral out of urgency. Her father stopped to gather, and the Argo slipped away. From then on, their wake tasted of magic and blood. They wandered back by strange coasts and near disasters. When they reached Iolcus, Peleus refused to step down. Medea, with surgical cruelty, tricked his daughters into cutting him to pieces and boiling him, promising renewal that was only grief. The city rose up. Jason and Medea fled to Corinth. Years passed. Ambition woke. Jason planned a new marriage to a Corinthian princess. Medea, betrayed, sent a robe that burned the girl to bone and killed the girl's father when he tried to save her. Then, to carve the lesson deeper and to sever every rope, she killed her own children by Jason. The gods sent her a chariot drawn by dragons, and she rode away above a city that would talk about her forever in low voices and loud plays. Jason's end was quiet and cruel. He returned one day to sit under the rotting hull of the Argo, the ship that had carried his brightest hours, and a beam came loose and killed him. No thunder, just gravity and memory. By now, the pattern is clear. Greek heroes don't get happy endings in the way we define them. They get meaning. They get songs. They get names that outlast their cities. And their gods, watching from cloud-bright halls or walking the earth in borrowed shapes, keep entwining their stories with mortal ones until neither can stand alone. Thebes wears its crown crooked. Even in myth, some cities shine clean. Delphi with its clear voice. Athens with its clever hands. Thebes, though, is built on omens and blood. A house where riddles hang in doorways and guests bring curses with their wreaths. Its story begins with a search that fails and becomes something else. Cadmus, a Phoenician prince, set out to find his sister Europa after Zeus' patient. Charming and disguised as a white bull carried her away across the sea. Kings in myth often stand at crossroads between pride and surrender. Cadmus chose counsel. He asked the oracle at Delphi where to go. Apollo's voice, sifted through the Pythia's breath, told him to quit the search and follow a cow, instead walk until the animal lay down, and there found a city. He obeyed. The cow wandered into Boeotia and sank to its knees on a hill. Cadmus sent men to fetch water for a sacrifice, and there the first Theban omen bared its teeth. A serpent sacred to Ares, coiled at the spring, tore Cadmus's companions to pieces. Cadmus slew at iron over scale and stood panting above a god's guardian, its blood darkening the ground. Athena arrived, bright and brisk, and told him to sow the dragon's teeth like seed. From the furrows sprang armed men called Spartoi sown. They rose, fully made and ready to kill. Cadmus threw a stone among them, and suspicion bloomed instantly. They fell upon each other until only 5 remained, ancestors of Thebes' great houses. Cadmus had planted violence and reaped a city. For killing Ares' serpent, Cadmus served the war god for 8 years, a mythic sentence that sounds like a moral. Even righteous victories have debts. When the debt was paid, Cadmus married Harmonia, daughter of Ares and Aphrodite, their wedding attended by gods, the kind of celebration that looks like blessing and behaves like a fuse. Hephaestus gave Harmonia a necklace, a lovely thing with a curse braided into its clasp. Pass down the doom with it. The city grew on a foundation of wonders and warnings. The children of Cadmus and Harmonia became cautionary tales. Ino went mad and leapt with her son into the sea, becoming a sea spirit that helps sailors and cannot help herself. Otnu's son Actaeum saw Artemis bathing in a forest pool. The goddess turned him into a stag, and his own hounds tore him apart. Semele, lover of Zeus, begged to see him in his full divine fire, tricked by Hera's quiet cruelty. She burned, and Zeus saved the unborn Dionysus by sewing him into his thigh. Agave, the last, will come back later with a head in her hands, and a story she cannot immediately bear. Cadmus and Harmonia eventually left Thebes. The city stayed. The necklace stayed too, and its curse matured. Time moved and Thebes found its king, Laius. He took Jocasta as queen. An oracle warned him, "If you have a son, he will kill you and marry his mother." Greek myths are allergic to ignoring prophecies. Nobody truly shrugs and carries on, but they're equally allergic to successful escape. Laius tried to outmaneuver fate. When the child was born, he pierced the baby's ankles and ordered a servant to leave him on Mount Cithaeron to die. The servant, caught between orders and pity, handed the baby to a shepherd from Corinth. The shepherd carried him to Corinth's childless royals, Polybus and Merope. They raised the boy and named him Oedipus, Swollen Foot. He grew clever, proud, and restless, the kind of young man who asks questions that make dinner uncomfortable. Rumors about his birth reached his ears. Seeking certainty, Oedipus went to Delphi. The oracle refused to soothe him. "You will kill your father and marry your mother." Horrified, and believing Polybus and Merope to be his real parents, he fled Corinth to protect them, ironically running away from those he would not harm and toward those he would. On a dusty road near a place called the Crossroads, a chariot shoved him aside. An old man in it, a king with a stubborn jaw, ordered him out of the way. They quarreled, as strangers do when pride meets heat. Oedipus swung. Men fell. The old king died in the splash of a wheel rut. Oedipus didn't know he had just killed Laius, his father, and set a clock he couldn't hear. Thebes at that moment groaned under a different curse. The Sphinx. A creature with a woman's face, lion's body, and eagle's wings perched by the gate and devoured anyone who failed to answer her riddle. What goes on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening? Oedipus answered like a man who had walked in many shoes already. A human. Crawling as a baby, walking upright, and later leaning on a cane. The Sphinx hurled herself from the rock. Thebes exhaled. In gratitude, they made Oedipus king and gave him Jocasta's hand. He married his mother without knowing. The city cheered the end of one curse and did not see another take its place like a shadow stepping into a shadow. Years passed. Oedipus ruled well. He and Jocasta had 4 children: Eteocles, Polynices, Antigone, and Ismene. Then the land withered. Plague spread. The oracle said Thebes must punish the man who killed Laius. The search for justice became a hunt for a mirror. Witnesses were questioned. A survivor remembered a roadside brawl. The shepherd who spared a baby was found at last and told what he had done. Jocasta saw the shape of truth first. She begged Oedipus to stop digging. He didn't. People say they want truth. They rarely specify how much. And then the knots pulled tight. Oedipus was the killer. Jocasta was his mother. The prophecy had not chased him down. It had waited where choices intersect. Jocasta hanged herself. Oedipus took her brooch and put out his eyesight traded for insight. A cruel bargain accepted in full. He begged to be exiled. Creon, Jocasta's brother, took the throne and sent Oedipus away. Antigone fierce, loyal walked beside her father, guiding him with a hand that never trembled. They reached Colonus, a quiet grove near Athens, a place symphonic with birds and olive leaves. There Oedipus vanished, in some telling swallowed by the earth, as if forgiven, in others taken by gentle gods. The site became sacred and secret, the kind of place where the wind itself refuses to gossip. But Thebes' curse wasn't done tallying. Eteocles and Polynices' brothers, rivals, struck a bargain to share the throne by turns. Power hates sharing. Eteocles refused to step down. Polynices fled to Argos, gathered allies, and returned with an army, the Seven, against Thebes. On the city's 7 gates stood heroes with names like drums. At each gate, Thebans stood to meet them. The war felt like fate paying with interest. In the end, the brothers met in single combat and killed each other. 2 sons of the same mother fell in dust no rain could rinse clean. Creon took power again. He declared Polynices a traitor and denied him burial. In Greek thought, denial of burial is not a punishment. It is erasure. It leaves a soul stranded, a family dishonored, a city out of step with divine law. Antigone refused to accept that. She buried her brother with a handful of dust enough to count, and spoke the line every citizen in every age must weigh. Your edict is not strong enough to overrule the unwritten and unfailing laws of the gods. Creon shut her in a cave to die. The gods sent signs. Tiresias, the blind seer who sees too much, warned him. He relented too late. Antigone was dead by her own hand. Haemon, Creon's son and Antigone's betrothed, killed himself over her body. Eurydice, Creon's wife, followed. The house of Thebes echoed with a new silence. Creon stood in it, a lesson carved into flesh. A ruler can be right by the book and wrong in the world. The necklace of Harmonia glinted through these tragedies like a thread of cold light. It moved from neck to neck and story to story, bringing prestige, bringing ruin, until eventually it tangled a different pair. 2 siblings whose war would burn not one city, but many, Atreus and Thyestes. But hold that for now. Thebes has one more God-shaped chapter to close, and it arrives with drums, wine, and a 1,000-yard stare. Dionysus came home. He was the son of Zeus and Semele, the Theban princess, who died of seeing too much God too soon. Twice born, once from a mortal womb, again from Zeus' thigh. He returned to Thebes with followers, the Maenads and Satyrs, bringing vines that take root overnight and a joy that can tip into frenzy. Pentheus, Thebes' young king, stiff with skepticism, decided to stamp out the gods' rights. He arrested Dionysus, mocked him, and wanted to spy on the women who had gone to the hills to celebrate. The gods suggested a disguise, a dress, a veil, an invitation to witness what should not be watched. Up on the slopes, delirium met arrogance. The Maenads mistook Pentheus for a lion. Agave, his mother, led the tearing. Only when she carried his head back to the city did the spell lift and the scream arrive. It is not the loudest scene in Greek myth, but it is among the coldest. A mother waking inside a nightmare she made with her hands. Dionysus is the contradiction god. Wine and theater, madness and healing, the way masks reveal and revels reset. Thebes learned his lesson late, as it learned most lessons. The city survived, cities do, but around it lay fields sown with teeth and watered with grief. Even so, crops grew. Children played. New kings wore old rings and told themselves they could be different. Thebes fades into the background as another city's smoke rises. A wedding will soon host a golden apple. 3 goddesses will ask a shepherd to judge them. A prince will break guest friendship and sail home with someone else's queen. Oaths sworn in hopeful youth will take 10 years to honor. The Achaeans will gather at Aulis and find no wind. A father will choose between war and his daughter. And a new song will begin, the longest, loudest, and most repeated of the Greek world. It begins with a wedding and a guest list. Everyone's invited, gods, nymphs, heroes, everyone, except Eris, goddess of discord. You can see why they left her out. You can also see why that was a mistake. Eris doesn't crash the party with a speech. She tosses a golden apple onto the table, bright enough to catch every eye. 3 words carved into its skin: to the fairest. 3 goddesses reach for it at once. Hera, queen of gods. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war. And Aphrodite, the very force that turns heads and starts poems. Zeus refuses to judge wise for once and kicks the choice downhill to a mortal. Not just any mortal. Paris, a Trojan shepherd prince tucked into the hills because a prophecy once said he would burn his city. He grew handsome, soft-voiced, good at judging cattle and music. Apparently, he's about to judge divinity too. They don't play fair. Hera offers empire, rule over all men. Athena offers victory in battle and a mind that never misses. Aphrodite plays the card no one can refuse. The love of the most beautiful woman alive. Paris gives her the apple. And just like that, cause meets effect. Aphrodite smiles like thunder you don't hear yet. The woman is Helen of Sparta, daughter of Zeus and Leda, moral husband Tyndareus, standing somewhere between pride and dread. Princes and kings from all over Greece courted her. Odysseus, clever, even when unnoticed, offered a plan. Make them swear a collective oath to defend the chosen, husband against any who might steal her. It worked. Helen chose Menelaus, brother of Agamemnon of Mycenae. The oath curled quietly under the table like a sleeping dog. Then Paris arrived in Sparta as a guest under Menelaus's roof, a sacred status called xenia, guest friendship, the backbone of hospitality and trust in the Greek world. Whether Helen went willingly or was taking changes with the singer. Some say Aphrodite bent her heart. Some say a phantom Helen went to Troy while the real one waited in Egypt. But in the version that held the stage longest, Paris sailed with Helen at his side. Menelaus returned to an empty hall. The oath of the suitors woke up and bared its teeth. Messengers fanned out. Kings counted ships. The roll call reads like a map. Nestor of sandy Pylos with counsel aged like oak. Diomedes of Argos, grim and bright with a god's favor. Idomeneus from Crete, steady as a wave that doesn't break. The 2 Ajaxes, Telamonian, the massive wall of a man, Oilean, the quick knife. Odysseus of Ithaca, reluctant, cunning, trying to plow a field with salt to feign madness until Palamedes set his infant son before the furrow and the ruse collapsed. Achilles, the best of the odds hidden by his mother Thetis among the daughters of Lycomedes until Odysseus laid out trinkets and weapons. The boy's hand went to the spear. The die was cast. 1,000 ships, so the poets round it gathered at Aulis. And then nothing. No wind. Sails hung like tired lungs. The seer Calchas tasted the gods in the air and flinched. Artemis was angry reasons vary. A boast? A deer killed in sacred groves. A goddess slighted by a king whose reach had grown careless. Only a great sacrifice would open the sea. Calchas spoke a name that shook the camp. Iphigenia, Agamemnon's daughter. There are 2 main tellings. In one, Agamemnon lies to bring her to Aulis, promising marriage to Achilles. She arrives with her mother, Clytemnestra, hopeful and radiant. The truth blooms at the altar. The knife falls, the wind rises, and a hatred is born in a queen that will one day change Mycenae's floor plan. In the other telling, Artemis spares the girl at the last moment, whisking her away and leaving a deer in her place. Either way, the gods are appeased, the sails billow, and the Greek fleet spills east like an iron tide. The first blood on Trojan soil belongs to Protesilaus, first to leap ashore, first to fall a grim symmetry the Greeks loved. The initial clash shatters the calm, but not the city. Troy's walls loom and hold. Years slide by. Raids keep the Greek army fed. Alliances knot and fray. The Iliad, when it finally opens its mouth to sing, begins in year 10 at a moment where boredom, pride, and divine politics sharpen into a single point. Here's the heart of it. The war is as much about men's hearts as it is about Helen. Agamemnon, High King, confident and grasping, takes Chrysa's daughter of Chryses, a priest of Apollo, as a prize. The old man comes with a ransom, respectful, pleading. Agamemnon sneers and sends him away. The priest prays. Apollo answers with plague arrows of illness humming invisibly through the camp. Calchas names the cause. The army groans. Agamemnon reluctantly gives Chryses back, but claims Briseis from Achilles as compensation. Achilles has a face for glory and a temper like dry grass. He hears insult, not logistics. He calls Agamemnon greedy, cowardly, unfit. Agamemnon snaps back. In front of everyone, power strips honor off the best fighter alive. Achilles doesn't draw his sword. Athena herself checks his hand, but he withdraws from battle, swears he won't lift a finger to save the Greeks, and asks his mother Thetis to tilt the war against them so they'll learn what his absence costs. She asks Zeus. Zeus nods. That nod is the true beginning of the poem's sadness. Without Achilles, the Trojan tide rises. Hector strides from the gates, not a swaggering prince, but a husband and father carrying his city like a shield. He's the Greek poet's favorite Trojan because he looks the most like what Greeks wanted to be. Brave without cruelty, dutiful without pomp. Day after day, the fighting sloshes back and forth on the plain. Fire licks Greek ships. Dust paints everything the same color as grief. Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion, the word you choose for him says more about you than the myth. Can't watch it anymore. He begs Achilles for his armor and his name, just long enough to push the Trojans back from the halls. Achilles agrees, but warns. Drive them away, then stop. Do not storm the walls. Battle is an appetite. Once it wakes, it keeps eating. Patroclus, shining in borrowed bronze, rallies the Myrmidons, breaks the Trojan momentum, and intoxicated chases glory to the city gates. There, Apollo shoves him. Euphorbus wounds him. Hector finishes him. Armor stripped, fame rebalanced. News reaches Achilles. The hinge of the Iliad turns. His grief isn't quiet. It splits the camp and the sky. He returns to war not for Greece, not for oaths, but for Patroclus. Thetis brings him new armor, Hephaestus' masterpiece. A shield with the whole world hammered into it. Cities at peace and war, vineyards and dances, courts and fields. A universe that keeps existing even when heroes die. Achilles moves through battle like a natural disaster that learned to run. The river chokes on bodies and tries to drown him. He fights the river. He finds Hector at last. Priam and Hecuba beg their son to come inside. He stays. They circle the walls like second hands on a broken clock. Athena tricks Hector into standing still. The fight is short. Achilles kills him, pierces his heels, and drags the body behind his chariot. Dust grinding into skin that once held a city's hopes. For days, he does it again and again. It isn't about war anymore. It's about rage getting everything it asked for and discovering it's still hungry. Then night brings an old man to the Greek tents. Priam, guided by Hermes past sleeping guards and cold spearheads, kneels before the boy who killed his son and kisses the hands still hot with it. I have done what no man before me has done, he says. I have kissed the hand of the man who killed my children." Achilles looks at him and sees not a king, not an enemy, but a father. He thinks of Peleus, old and far, of mornings that won't come back, of how fast even the biggest names will be quiet. He weeps. He returns Hector's body. For a moment, war steps aside so grief can do what it does. The Iliad ends there. Not with a sack, not with a horse, but with a funeral and a pause. We know what comes next because the myth keeps going even when the poem doesn't. Achilles will die an arrow in the heel, shot by Paris, guided by Apollo, ending a life that was always going to be short and shattering. Armor will be fought over. Odysseus will win the contest of words over Ajax, who will fall on his own sword in shame. The Greeks will stop trying to knock the walls down and start thinking like thieves. Wood will roll toward a gate under the sign of Athena, and trust will do the rest. But hold there a beat. Before the city burns, before the sea carries curses home, the gods themselves take sides and take offense. Hera, Athena, and Poseidon favored the Greeks. Aphrodite, Ares, Apollo, and Artemis keep watch over Troy. Zeus pretends neutrality and fails at it. Every spear thrown has a signature on it. Every wind has a petition attached. Dawn breaks over Troy with an empty horizon. After 10 years of siege, of duels in dust, of feasts in fear, of children learning to sleep through the clang of armor, the watchmen climb the towers and blink into a quiet they've forgotten how to trust. The Greek beach is bare. No tents, no cook fires, no laughter that sounds like threats. The ships are gone. In their place stands a single thing so out of place it rewrites the morning. A colossal wooden horse. It's beautiful in the way a lie is beautiful. Its flanks are smooth joined cedar. Its mane is carved with careful pride. It is too big, too deliberate, too wrong for the plain it sits on. You can feel argument warming up in the city's throat. Trojans pour from the gates like water finding a slope. Children point. Old men squint. Priam, weighed down by years and names, asks for sense. Some say burn it. Others say drag it to the temple as a trophy. The horse radiates a kind of gravitas that makes both options feel plausible. Then a man appears. Sinon, Greek, tied, bruised. He claims he escaped his own army's cruelty. He spins a story so practiced, it might as well be a spell. He says the Greeks went home at last, battered and ashamed, and this horse is their apology to Athena for the sacrilege of the war, the thefts, the temple desecrations, the ugly things men do when the years make them into wolves. He says the horse is oversized, so the Trojans can't take it inside their walls. If they manage it anyway, Athena will flip her favor forever. He says what the Trojans want to hear. This is a gift that guarantees your city. A different voice interrupts. Laocoon, priest of Poseidon, strides forward with a scowl that could crack the sculpture. He doesn't give speeches. He throws a spear. It thunks into the horse's flank. The hollow belly answers with a dull, betraying ring. The air goes thin. You can almost hear the breath being held inside. Laocoon turns to the crowd and says the line that outlives him. Beware Greeks, even when they bear gifts. He is right, and the next thing that happens makes rightness useless. From the sea crawl two serpents, thick as pillars, eyes like banked coals. They coil around Laocoon and his sons and crush them. The city freezes, then collapses into superstition. A sign, they say. The gods are angry with Laocoon. The horse is sacred. The irony is lethal. Poseidon's creatures kill Poseidon's priests to punish Poseidon's favorite city for trusting Poseidon's enemies. The gods in Greek myth are many things. Consistent is not one of them. Ropes are thrown. Doors groan. The horse scrapes the gate and showers splinters. Women add their song to the effort. Wheels screech. The horse tips through the mouth of Troy and into the square beneath Athena's temple, where it stands suddenly at home as if it had always belonged to the skyline. Night falls. Wine flows. After a decade of rationed joy, the city drinks as if it can bank enough happiness to outlast whatever comes. Torches gutter. Doors close. Inside the horse, cramped among timbers that smell like pitch and sweat, men move with the patience of thieves. Odysseus is there, the architect of the deceit, counting breaths. Menelaus is there, face carved into an oath. Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, sharp with inherited rage. Diomedes, who wounded gods and doesn't brag about it. A few chosen others. They wait until the last of the singing thins to snores, until the last torch hisses out. Then they pry open a hatch. Rope ladders slide. Footsteps kiss roofs. Shadows cross walls. Out at sea, the Greek fleet had not gone home. It had only tucked itself behind Tenedos, sails furled in the dark. When the signal fire lifts its red tongue into the night, oars bite water. Keels whisper back onto the beach they left at dawn. The city still sleeps. What follows isn't a battle. It's a burglary turning into a massacre. Gates are unbarred from within. Trumpets stay silent. Blades do not. Neoptolemus makes straight for the palace. He finds Priam at the altar of Zeus Hercules, the old god who watches over households. He kills him there, blood splashing on stones meant to protect kings from exactly this. Hecuba kings. The sound she makes is older than speech. Elsewhere, Menelaus threads the halls until he finds Helen. Some say she lowers her eyes and her voice at the same time and talks her way past the edge of his sword. Some say she doesn't need to. That seeing her again is enough to make his rage evaporate like dew. The poets disagree, but the larger truth is stable. She goes home to Sparta with him, and the world refuses to decide if she is villain, victim, or a mirror that only reflects the people looking. Cassandra, Priam's daughter and Apollo's cursed prophetess, clings to Athena's statue and speaks the truth for the last time. Ajax the Lesser drags her away, violating her in the goddess's temple. A taboo is broken that will break him later. Astyanax, Hector's little boy, is torn from Andromach's arms and thrown from the wall, so he won't grow up into a reason for revenge. If there is a moment when Greek myth looks hardest at itself, it might be here men doing what they say they hate, to ensure they won't someday suffer what they deserve. Fire walks the streets hand in hand with wind. The horse's silhouette dances over flames. The roof of the palace becomes a ribcage lit from within. Statues split. The Scamander River reflects a second city made of fire. By dawn, Troy is a past tense. Survivors are not many and not lucky. Women are parceled out by lots, noble grief reduced to inventory. Hecuba to Odysseus in some tellings. Andromache to Neoptolemus, who will treat her with more kindness than his first night suggests. Cassandra to Agamemnon, carrying disaster like a dowry. Polyxena sacrificed at Achilles' tomb, paying a debt no god collected but men insisted on honoring. It is ritual as excuse, cruelty dressed as piety. Only one Trojan departure will be remembered as anything close to hopeful. Aeneas, son of Anchises and Aphrodite, he shoulders his old father, takes his young son by the hand, and walks out under a sky that refuses to collapse as long as he keeps moving. His wife, Creusa, is lost in the smoke. Her shade tells him to go on. He will, west. His story belongs to another language and another empire. But in this moment, he looks like the last intact thread of a tapestry on fire. The Greeks have what they came for and what they never wanted. Victory that feels like rot. The gods are not done with them. The sea keeps score, and so do women waiting at windows and kings standing in doorways with knives tucked out of sight. Nostos, the homecoming, is not an afterword. It's a second war fought against storms, curses, old sins, and the kind of silence that makes a man hear everything he's tried not to think about. Ajax the Lesser will drown under Athena's storm, clawing at a rock he bragged would save him. Neoptolemus will be cut down at Delphi, blood on Apollo's clean stones. Diomedes will wander until his name thins to rumor. Menelaus and Helen will arrive back in Sparta to rule together, united, complicated, unpardoned by history. Agamemnon will step into a bath drawn by the wife whose daughter he killed for a wind and never step out. But the longest road belongs to the man who thought of the horse, who can talk his way past any door and now has to talk to the sea. Odysseus will need 10 more years to go not that many miles. He will meet a Cyclops and name himself nobody. He will visit a witch and become a better version of himself. He will hear the sirens and live by being tied to something stronger than desire. He will lose everyone and everything except the patience to keep going. He will come home to a wife whose loom is a calendar and a hall full of men who mistook waiting for weakness. The reckoning will be swift and exact. The ships push off from a shore that used to be a city. Oars bite water that tastes like ash. Sails catch wind that smells like old smoke. The Greeks, victors by dawn, haunted by dusk, turn their prows toward home and discover quickly that home is not a place you arrive. It's a trial you survive. The gods have long memories, the sea longer still. Agamemnon leads the fleet, king of kings, laureled and tired. His holds heavy with gold, bronze, and people, Cassandra among them, the prophetess who sees and cannot persuade. She speaks. No one listens. The curse isn't volume, it's reception. You can shout truth into a hurricane and hear only your own breath. The first lesson is immediate. Sacrilege doesn't wash off in salt water. Ajax the Lesser had dragged Cassandra from Athena's temple. The goddess doesn't write complaints. She writes weather. A storm rears up, black columns of rain, lightning stitching the horizon and smashes ships like toys. Ajax claws his way to a rock and boasts that not even the gods can drown him now. Poseidon splits the rock with his trident. The sea closes over hubris with a final, uninterested slap. The fleet scatters. In ancient sailing, there is no convoy, only a common hope. Menelaus and Helen blow off course, south and further south, until Egypt's slow river and cool priests open their doors. There, in some versions, lies a story that almost sounds like grace. That the Helen who went to Troy was a phantom, a cloud-shaped likeness sent by Hera to mock Paris and the Greeks, while the real Helen waited in Egypt, chaste and patient as a story scorned by war. Menelaus brings her home at last, and Sparta receives them like guests, like ghosts, like a cautionary parable about the gap between what we fight for and what we actually touch. In other versions, she was Helen all along complicated, complicit, forgiven, because beauty is a kind of absolution kings find easy to grant. Either way, they return changed and not redeemed, ruling together in a house that never quite warms. Diomedes, who fought like a man with a god's second sight, returns to Argos to find that fame is not marriage counseling. His wife, persuaded by Aphrodite's lingering spite, has given his bed to another. His people turn cold. He leaves. Some say he found cities in Italy. Some say he dissolves into legend like salt in rain. Nestor-wise, because he lived long enough to taste every mistake, twice sails home to Pylos and actually makes it. A rare, clean ending. Hearth, stories, children who listen. It feels almost un-Greek in how little blood it requires. The darkest homecoming belongs to the house of Atreus, and that's saying something. The curse there is older than Troy, older than Iphigenia's white throat, older even than Agamemnon's ambition. Atreus and Thyestes, brothers with a talent for mutual ruin, set the tone. A stolen throne, a stolen wife, and Atreus serving Thyestes a dinner made from his own sons. The gods did not invent the horrors of that house. They merely watched as mortals outpaced them. So when Agamemnon steps onto Mycenae's stone, the ground is already listening for footsteps it plans to betray. Clytemnestra has had 10 years to measure her grief and sharpen it into decision. She lost a daughter at Aulis, not to fate, she would argue, but to choice disguised as necessity. She took a lover, Aegisthus, not as consolation but as co-conspirator. She has spent 10 years running the kingdom while men at war wrote home about honor. Agamemnon arrives with Cassandra at his side. Clytemnestra greets him with hospitality thick as honey and just as sticky. She lays out purple tapestries and urges him to walk on them, an act fit for gods, not men. He hesitates. He steps. The trap tightens in silence. Cassandra, seeing everything, stands at the palace threshold and names her fate, and his in lines that should have saved the city if the city had earned saving. The gates swallow them. Some say Clytemnestra waits with an axe, others with a net. Either way, she kills him in the bath pride unarmed, steam rising. A king made briefly human again by water, and kills Cassandra too, the truest voice in the house, because prophecies do not stop being right just because they are inconvenient. When she stands over their bodies, she doesn't gloat. She testifies. I did it, she says, and I do not regret it. Vengeance distilled into principle is the sharpest blade in Greek tragedy. Their son, Orestes, is away. Their daughter, Electra, remains a live wire in a dark wall. Time passes. Apollo whispers to Orestes when he comes of age, "Avenge your father." The god who once demanded Iphigenia dead now demands Clytemnestra dead, because justice in these stories is less a scale than a pendulum. Orestes returns in disguise with his friend Peleus. He kills Aegisthus quickly. Then he faces his mother. "Son," she says, "I nursed you. Will you kill me?" "Mother," he says, "you killed my father." There's no angle that doesn't cut. He strikes. The house exhales and then inhales something worse. Blood calls blood. The Furies here. They are older than Zeus, older than law, older than gods in chairs. They rise from below like a thought you can't unthink and chase Orestes into madness. He runs to Apollo's temple at Delphi. The god offers temporary asylum, then sends him to Athens with the Furies in full cry after him. There, Athena does something new. She invents a court. Areopagus. Jurors. Votes. Argument instead of murder. The Furies speak for the old laws. Blood must answer blood. Apollo and Orestes speak for the new mercy has to exist somewhere other than the pauses between killings. The votes tie. Athena breaks the tie for acquittal. She offers the Furies a home beneath the city. Honors, new names, Eumenides, the kindly ones. They accept. Civilization, in this telling, is not a clean break with the past. It's a negotiated peace with what scared us into behaving. If you listen, you can hear the Greek world thinking in that moment. Maybe we can stop letting ghosts write our laws. Meanwhile, far from courts and compromises, another homecoming unspools like a knotted rope you can only loosen by patient pulling. Odysseus. His ship glides past capes where men tell themselves stories about monsters to explain why the currents go sideways. He has angered Poseidon by blinding Polyphemus, the Cyclops, and the sea god's son. A tactical win, a strategic disaster. Every harbor is now a question mark. First come the lotus eaters gentle, forgetful souls who offer flowers that erase purpose. Odysseus drags his men back to the boats, cursing sweetness as he goes. Next, the Cyclops' cave cheese, milk, and a sleeping giant. Curiosity blooms in the catastrophe. They are trapped. The Cyclops eats men the way a bored king eats grapes. Odysseus hardens a stake, blinds the monster while he sleeps, and tells him his name is Nobody, a joke so good it saves lives. When Polyphemus screams that nobody heard him, the other Cyclopes shrug and roll over. They escape under the bellies of sheep. At the waterline, pride ruins prudence. Odysseus shouts his real name. Polyphemus calls on his father. Poseidon listens. Aeolus, keeper of winds, tries to help bags up every gust except the one Odysseus needs. They can see Ithaca's smoke. Sailors being sailors, his men untie the bag in sight of home. The ship is hurled back to sea. Aeolus, feeling used, slams his door. Laestrygonians come next, giant cannibals who reduce the fleet to one ship and a handful of men. Circe follows, enchantress on Ea, turning men into pigs because, frankly, a lot of them had already done the metaphorical work. Hermes lends Odysseus a herb, moly, to resist her spells. He lowers his sword. She lowers her defenses. They share a year of bed and table, a pause that feels like surrender and healing at once. Then she points him downward. If you want to go home, you have to ask the dead for directions. In the underworld's edge shadow, Odysseus meets ghosts like stations on a moral map. Elpenor, unburied friend, asking for a small kindness. Tiresias, the blind seer, giving him a path strewn with if you can and if you don't. His mother, who died of missing him. Achilles, who says he'd rather be a hired hand alive than a king among shades. Odysseus leaves with his head down and his priorities sharpened. Back on the sea, the sirens sing knowledge without mercy, desire without end. He plugs his crew's ears with wax and has himself tied to the mast, proof that some temptations are survivable only if you outsource your will. Between Scylla and Charybdis, he makes a captain's choice. Lose a few to save the many. He loses 6 and learns what leadership tastes like when it's honest. Then the island of Helios, where sacred cattle graze like living laws. Warning stack, do not eat them. A storm strands them. Hunger chants louder than memory. His men slaughter a cow. The sun tells on them. Zeus replies with lightning. The ship breaks. Everyone dies, but Odysseus, who clings to a spa like an idea and washes ashore on Ogygia, where Calypso receives him with immortal arms and a long memory. 7 years of kindness that feels like gilded captivity. He weeps on the beach, staring at a horizon that refuses to move. Hermes arrives with a message. Let him go. Calypso does, with a speech about how gods are judged for loving mortals, how double standards run on ambrosia, like everything else up there. A homemade raft. Another storm Poseidon again, old grievances aging into habits. Ino's veil saves him. He crawls onto the shore of Scheria, land of the Phaeacians, who excel at ships, sports, and hospitality. Nausicaa, a princess with practical hands, finds him. They feed him, wash the salt off his skin, ask for his name. He tells them everything, the long-suffering, the clever escapes, the parts where he was small and selfish, and the parts where he was large and wrong. They listen and then do the simplest, bravest thing. They give him a ride home. Ithaca, at last. He returns not in a chariot, not with trumpets, but dressed like a beggar, the safest and most dangerous costume. In his house, suitors eat his food and plan to force his wife's hand. Penelope has been waiting with the weapon women wield best in these stories. Time, turned into fabric. She weaves a shroud by day and unweaves it by night. When the lie is discovered, she sets a test. String Odysseus's bow and shoot an arrow clean through 12 axe heads. No one can even string it. The beggar can. The room shifts. Doors are barred. The air becomes history waiting to happen. Odysseus, Telemachus, the swineherd Eumaeus, the cowherd Philotius IV, against a hall packed with men who confused patience with permission. The first arrow kills the loudest one. The rest learn that hospitality has a god behind it, and that this house remembers. Blood washes the flagstones. Mercy is calibrated, not absent. Unfaithful maids meet rope. Unfaithful men meet iron. It is ugly. It is inevitable within the grammar of the story that brought us here. At the end of killing, silence. Odysseus stands in it, shaking slightly from how much purpose costs. Penelope does not run to him. She tests him with a detail only they share their bed, rooted in a living olive tree, unmovable unless you cut the house apart. He flares hurt, indignant, and that flicker of temper, that exactness about what is his, tells her what his face and voice cannot. She knows him. They collapse into each other like a city finally letting down its walls. Odysseus' story will try to spawn another round of vengeance. Athena will blanch it into peace, because even gods tire of reruns. But the homecoming isn't truly about swords or gods. It's about the long, ordinary stubbornness of staying yourself when the world keeps trying to edit you. It's about waiting without hardening. It's about a bow only one man can string, and a bed only one couple can describe. We've traced the arc from burning Troy to blood-washed halls, from storms that punish to courts that forgive. But the gods don't just preside from thrones. They lean down, wrap themselves in mist, fall in love, get jealous, invent theater, teach us to plant, and negotiate with death. Olympus isn't just a skyline. It's a government with family dinners. The gods are personalities turned into weather patterns, each with a jurisdiction and a mood, and together they make a world that looks suspiciously like ours, except brighter, pettier, and immortal. Start with Zeus. His thunderbolt is less a weapon than a stamp of approval. Order affirmed, oath enforced, hubris corrected with light. He didn't invent justice, but he centralized it. His power rests on three pillars. Force, the lightning, the eagles, the nod that tips battlefields. Alliance, brothers appeased with realms, titans chained but consulted, lesser gods kept busy with titles. Narrative control, oracles answer to Apollo, but the big arcs bend toward Zeus not getting dethroned. He's a serial lover and a cautious ruler, a contradiction wired into the throne. He fears prophecy, and yet fathers the prophecies that keep the plot moving. Hera sits beside him, not behind, never under. She governs marriage, sovereignty, the dignity of lawful union. In a cosmic prank, her portfolio often puts her at odds with Zeus's extracurriculars. She can be vengeful, yes, but that's the shorthand of impatient storytellers. Look closer, and you see a queen who defends the architecture that keeps cities from becoming camps. She punishes violations of vows, because vows are the only bridges that don't wash out in storms. Poseidon is the sea with a beard, changeable, deep, territorial. Earthquakes are his tantrums, horses his gifts, harbors his grudges. He respects strength and remembers slights with geological patience. Sailors pray to him. City planners fear him. Poets use him when they need the horizon to have an opinion. Hades doesn't sit on Olympus much. He runs the only kingdom that never revolts, the underworld. No pitchfork, no red skin, just sovereignty over endings, wealth, the ground's hidden store, and honest accounting. The living fear him because they fear the bill. He doesn't cause death. He receives it. His realm has neighborhoods, Elysium for the blessed, Asphodel for the many, Tartarus for the unforgiven, and meadows where shades murmur like reeds. His queen, Persephone, stitches the surface to the depths. Her story is the hinge of seasons. Demeter's daughter went to a flowers. The earth opened. Hades took her below. The world browned with Demeter's grief. Famine threatened gods and men alike. A compromise was hammered out. Persephone would spend months below, pomegranate seeds swallowed like signatures, then rise and bring spring with her. It's not a rescue tale so much as a calendar in myth's clothing, a recognition that joy and loss take turns, and both are part of any harvest worth counting. Demeter herself is agriculture with a mother's ferocity. Temples to her are granaries with hymns. She taught men to cultivate, to store, to share. When she smiles, wheat hums. When she grieves, storage jars echo. The Eleusinian mysteries, her secret rites with Persephone, promised initiates not immortality, but a kinder understanding of death. That going under has a pattern, that the seed's burial is also its beginning. Hestia, often forgotten because drama ignores the reliable, is the hearth flame. Every home, every city hall, keeps her fire as a living citizen. She steps back from scandals and thus guarantees continuity. Without her, all the other gods are weather without walls. Athena arrives not with thunder, but with clarity. Born from Zeus's head, she carries craft and strategy in the same bag. She builds cities the way a good general builds a campaign. Resources allocated, defenses planned, culture seated, weaving and wisdom as forms of order. In Athens, she wins the patronage contest by giving the olive shade, oil, wood, a list of uses that reads like civilization. She favors clever mortals, not because they flatter her, but because they prove her right. That brains outlast brawn when brawn gets tired. Ares is war stripped of purpose. Clash, fear, adrenaline's aftertaste. Greeks respect him the way they respect cliffs, necessary, impressive, deadly up close. He is often outmaneuvered by Athena, not because he's weak, but because he's loud. His children look like battlefield aftermaths given names. Hephaestus is the counterpoint. Craft, forge, persistence. Layman leg, precise in hand. He makes palaces for gods and jewelry that carries curses like hidden springs. He is proof that utility is a kind of beauty. He marries Aphrodite in some tellings, a mismatch. That poets used to talk about how desire and craftsmanship circle each other warily. Aphrodite is gravity given a face. She doesn't just cause lust. She orchestrates affinity eros that upends, philia that knits, even the self-love that tips too far into vanity. Born from sea foam or the daughter of Zeus, depending which hymn you hum, she is as immoral as sunrise. She shows up, and things grow or burn based on who they touch. With her comes Eros, a boy in some stories older than the gods in others desire as first principle. Artemis and Apollo, twins of Leto, divide the day. Artemis guards wild places, childbirth, and the autonomy of those who choose the forest over the forum. She is mercy in a hard key, and can be lethal when boundaries are crossed. Apollo shines in straight lines. Music, prophecy, plague both sent and stilled, the geometry of temples and the exactness of verse. At Delphi, his oracle speaks in riddles that aren't riddles so much as instructions disguised as poetry. To worship Apollo is to admit that pattern exists even when we can't see it. Hermes is motion. Borders, thieves, traitors, messengers, jokes that land, lies that save lives, and the ease with which he slips into the underworld to guide soul psychopomp with winged sandals. He invented the lyre and the receipt. If Olympus had a startup incubator, he'd run it and forget his own demo day on purpose. Dionysus, the latecomer, is rupture and renewal. Wine is his emblem, but theater is his cathedral. Masks that tell the truth. Roles that let us be larger or smaller than ourselves until we remember where our edges are. He punishes the refusal to dance and heals the wound that refusal hides. His cults blur lines, gender, class, inside, outside, and in that blur, people find release or ruin, sometimes both in a single night. Put them together and you get a system with no constitution, but lots of precedent. They squabble, they favor, they punish, they gift. They remake mortals in their image and are remade in ours. The myths aren't theology so much as anthropology with thunder. They also keep having children, and those children tilt the map. Hermes and Aphrodite beget Hermaphroditus, a body that refuses the binary in a world that pretends binaries are natural. Ares and Aphrodite beget Eros as impulse and harmonia. As treaty the necklace in Thebes, a literalization of how beauty can bind and break. Apollo sires Asclepius, god of medicine, who learns to reverse death and gets struck by Zeus for it, then promoted to a god anyway, a messy early draft of bioethics. And beyond Olympus proper, older and odder presences hum. The fates Clotho, Lachesis, Atropos spin, measure, cut the thread of life. Zeus rules, but they schedule. The graces and muses grease and gild existence charm, art, memory that makes meaning. Poets call on them not to flatter, but to aim. The Nereids and river gods remind you that landscape is character. Cross a stream without greeting it, and you might not get to the other bank. What do these gods want? Honors, sacrifices, songs, respect for boundaries, xenia for hosts and guests, oaths kept, suppliants spared, altars not desecrated. Break those rules and storms develop personalities. What do mortals get? Not fairness, attention, and occasionally elevation. Heroes become constellations. Lovers become trees or springs. Girls chased by gods become laurel, reeds, stars, and while that reads as tragedy, the world in these stories is crowded with witnesses that used to be people, which is a way of saying nothing ever truly disappears. It just changes the form in which it can answer when called. If Olympus is the executive branch of myth, the land is the legislature. Stories embedded in rocks, islands, and capes. Greece is a country that legislates with landmarks. Every bend in the coast is a footnote, every headland a precedent. The myths don't just happen there. They explain why there is a there to begin with, why this stone matters, why that grove is quiet, why people step into a doorway and lower their voices without remembering who taught them. Start with Delphi, center of the world by declaration and by habit. Zeus sent out two eagles in opposite directions. They met above a rocky slope on Mount Parnassus. An Omphale's stone navel marks the spot, a bulging net-wrapped rock like a heartbeat you can touch. Once a lair of a serpent called Python, Delphi became Apollo's seat after he slew the dragon and set up order where chaos hissed. The Pythia Apollo's medium sat on a tripod above a fissure, breathed the thin holy air, and spoke. Kings traveled for answers. Farmers came for timing. Exiles arrived to ask if homes still had their names on it. The oracle rarely said yes or no. She said, if and beware, and remember. And the wise learned to hear in those words the sound of their own intentions clarified. At Delphi, even the vendor stalls felt sacred. Even the sacred felt practical. A maxim carved into the stone didn't glitter. It warned, know yourself. Another added, nothing in excess. The third, rarely quoted because it bites, said, pledge and ruin are near neighbors. To the west at Olympia, Zeus presided over a rare miracle, a scheduled peace. Every 4 years, a sacred truce Echecharia still diffused so athletes could run, wrestle, race chariots, and throw bronze and themselves as far as men can be thrown. There were no silver medals. There were olive wreaths and songs, and the knowledge that for a handful of days, Sparta and Athens could stand in the same dust and agree on the grammar of excellence. Victors had statues made. Poets had odes commissioned. Cities had bragging rights. The gods, in turn, had their due sacrifices and the unspoken proof that strength could be measured without immediately turning into war. South and east, Crete rises like a myth remembering itself. Knossos sprawls frescoes of women with bare breasts and steady eyes. Bulls mid-leap, meanders painted on walls like the blueprints of an argument about order that always concludes in favor of corridors. The labyrinth isn't just a maze. It's a metaphor for bureaucracy, for palaces that hum with the kind of power that requires maps to navigate. Mayas ruled there, with laws said to come from Zeus, wrought by a boy who went underwater and returned with tables only a sea could write. The Minotaur's story lust, punishment, engineered containment reads like a caution about the monsters nations build into their basements and then must feed. Daedalus, the architect who made escape difficult, later engineered his own. Wings waxed for his son Icarus, whose fall warned every apprentice since that ambition needs a thermometer. Samos, Delos, Naxos, Cyclades like pearls on a loose string carry their own statutes. Delos, birthplace of Apollo and Artemis, began as a floating island. When Leto pregnant prescribed needed ground to stand on, the island anchored itself and became a sanctuary where no one was allowed to be born or to die thereafter. The logic is ritualistic and kind. keep the sacred space unsullied by beginnings and endings, and it becomes a place where middles can breathe. Festivals there looked like architecture in motion choruses, moving in patterns that taught the crowd the shape of harmony. Athens legislates with a rock, the Areopagus, hill of Ares, where Orestes once stood trembling as Athena invented due process. Below it sprawls the Agora, marketplace of olives and arguments, where democracy learned to count hands and stones. The city chose a goddess with an olive tree over a god with a salt spring and never stopped, proving it was the right choice. Oil for lamps, wood for ships, fruit for trade, shade for philosophers who forgot what time it was. The Parthenon crowns the Acropolis like a geometric hymn, underwritten by empire and dedicated to an idea of order that can survive praise. Sparta writes its law in bodies. Lycurgus gave them a constitution with few words and many drills. Iron money so heavy it chained greed. Meals eaten in common to starve luxury. Boys pulled from their mother's arms to learn to move as one organism with a spear for a thought. Their myths are less flamboyant and more ancestral. Heracles' blood in their veins. Artemis Orthia's altar smeared in rites that tested pain and restraint. Theirs is a city that remembers war even on market days and distrusts poets unless the poem helps you march. To the north, Thebes, we've seen, is a casebook. To the east, the coast of Ionia sing more softly and write more sharply Miletus, Ephesus, places where philosophers ask not which god, but what is the world made of? Thales points at water. Heraclitus points at fire and change. Anaximander points at the Epiron, the boundless. They don't banish gods. They repurpose them into metaphors, which is another kind of worship and another kind of rebellion. Mountains legislate too. Olympus itself, tunic and flat at the top in the imagination, is in reality a jumble of peaks and storms that guarantee the gods will always have weather machines nearby. Parnassus gives poets and bees an address. Taygetus in Sparta shadows boys becoming hoplites. Cytheron remembers infant ankles and wild rites. Ida, there's one in Crete, and one near Troy houses both births and judgments, choices and consequences. Rivers with floods. Scamander outside Troy rose against Achilles. Alpheus in the Peloponnese pursues the nymph Arethusa underground until she emerges as a spring in Sicily, myth turned into hydrology. Achelous twists and shifts his channels like a god with too many moods, and in his wrestle with Heracles loses a horn that becomes a cornucopia, a legal transfer of abundance from chaos to strength. Capes and straits act like customs officers. At the Hellespont, Xerxes will one day lash the water for breaking his bridge. At the narrow throat of Salamis, Themistocles will herd Persian ships into a math problem only smaller boats can solve. At Thermopylae's hot gates, a handful of Spartans and allies will hold long enough for Greece to decide that land is not a thing you occupy. It's a story you defend. Sanctuaries knit it all together. At Epidaurus, Asclepius treats the sick in dreams. Snakes glide and don't frighten. At Dodona, Zeus speaks through oak leaves and clattering bronze cauldrons. Priests sleep on the ground to catch instructions in their bones. At Eleusis, Demeter's mysteries whisper the good news that dying doesn't have to be the worst part of living. Initiates come out tight-lipped and looser-hearted, as if someone reminded them that season cycle and grief is a weather you can dress for. And beyond the mainland, the sea itself writes bylaws that every island and port obeys. Xenia guest friendship extends across water as treaty and travel insurance. Offer a stranger bread, wine, salt, a seat. Ask their name after they've eaten. The gods wear rags sometimes. You don't want to fail their secret audits. The corollary is equally binding. A guest must not abuse a host. Paris's crime wasn't just theft. It was defilement of this maritime constitution. You can feel circling all these places a moral geography, a web of rules, customs, taboos, and celebrations that makes the Greek world coherent without ever making it uniform. One city prizes discipline, another prizes argument, a third prizes trade, a fourth dances and calls that politics. The gods referee and interfere, but the land remembers and enforces. Step wrong at a spring and a story corrects you. Step right on a festival day and doors open that aren't even visible the rest of the year. From here, two currents tug at our feet. One flows outward, colonies and diasporas, myths translated into new coasts, Sicily, southern Italy, the Black Sea where Greeks plant vines and stories, and both take root. The other flows inward. The tragedians in Athens, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, turning old tales into new mirrors for crowded theaters, while philosophers bring scalpels to concepts the poets once held in bare hands. The sun slides down behind the Acropolis, and Athens invents a civic heartbeat. Theater at dusk. Citizens, medics, foreigners, even some women and slaves in the shadows. Thousands sit on stone, looking downhill at a wooden stage where masks will make honesty possible. The city Dionysia is not entertainment. It's a ritual with tickets. Dionysus presides not as chaos, but as transformation. The chorus files in, a dozen or more voices that can be one voice when the city needs it. Aeschylus steps up first in history. He fought at Marathon and Salamis. His armor clanks in his verse. He takes myths and arms them with ideas. In Eurystheia, he does something nobody had done. A trilogy that begins in blood and ends with a vote. Agamemnon comes home. Clytemnestra kills him in Cassandra, her case airtight in the grammar of revenge. In The Libation Bearers, Orestes returns and kills her, his case equally airtight in the same old grammar. Then, the Eumenides breaks the treadmill. The Furies chase Orestes to Athens. Athena convenes the first jury. The city learns to move guilt from family vendetta to public judgment. It's more than plot, it's propaganda for a new civic order, beautifully argued. That law can tame rage without denying its ancient claim. Sophocles refines the form. Where Aeschylus is granite, Sophocles is carved marble-clean lines. Fatal clarity. His Oedipus Tyrannus is detective story turned inward. A king hunts a killer and finds himself. No god cackles, no villain schemes. Fate arrives as the consequence of character meeting truth. In Antigone, he tightens the vice. A girl insists on burying her brother in obedience to divine law. A king insists on order. Both are right. Both are wrong. The course the city watches, worries, warns. When the bodies are counted, the lesson isn't don't be stubborn. It's your kind of right can kill. Sophocles gives Athens a mirror with no flattering angles. Euripides brings the splinters and the smoke. He's the most modern, skeptical of gods, interested in women and foreigners, allergic to neat morals. In Medea, he gives the barbarian princess a mind so sharp it cuts the stage. Betrayed by Jason, she speaks like a lawyer, a poet, and a fury. She kills the rival bride and her father. Then she kills her own children, not as madness, but as strategy inside despair. The chorus is with her until it can't be. A chariot from the sun lifts her away. The audience is left on the ground, complicit and appalled. In the Bacchae, Dionysus comes to Thebes, and Euripides makes ecstasy terrifying. Pentheus, the rational autocrat, refuses the god and is torn apart by women drunk on a holiness he mocked. The play argues that you ignore what is irrational in humans at your own peril. The repressed will return with claws. Between them, the tragedians turn myth into public philosophy, the chorus into a conscience that can harmonize, and the audience into jurors of themselves. Comedy, across the way with Aristophanes, mocks the whole enterprise, lampooning politicians, philosophers, and the war that eats taxes and sons. Cloud skewers Socrates. Lysistrata imagines women ending war by ending sex. Laughter becomes a tool for sanity. Walk a few streets from the theater, and you hit questions that never finish. Socrates doesn't write. He walks and talks. He asks what virtue is, what justice is, what piety is. And whenever someone answers, he pulls the thread until the sweater falls apart. He's annoying and necessary a gadfly. He calls himself, prodding the city's complacent horse. He is tried for impiety and corrupting the youth. He drinks hemlock rather than run. His death is itself a tragic scene, a civic mistake the city will remember with a wince. Plato catches Socrates in amber dialogues, where thought becomes drama. In the Republic, he stages a Scythian speech to ask what justice looks like when scaled up. Philosopher kings, communal guardians, the cave where prisoners mistake shadows for reality. It's a warning and a wish, and the cave refuses to close. Every generation crawls out of some new illusion into a light it isn't sure it wants. In the Symposium, he toasts love up a ladder from bodies to forms, from attraction to the beautiful itself. In the Phaedo, he gives death a metaphysics. The soul is a remembering thing. Philosophy is practice for dying well. Aristotle, Plato's student, turns lanterns into daylight. He systematizes. Where Plato draws blueprints, Aristotle builds catalogs. Ethics becomes habits that aim at eudaimonia, human flourishing, in the space between excess and deficiency, the golden mean. Politics becomes regimes compared, constitutions weighed, citizens understood as beings who speak about justice. Poetics dissects tragedy, a protagonist not wholly good or bad, a hamartia that isn't sin so much as a missing the mark, pity and fear purged by catharsis. Biology becomes patient observation. Rhetoric becomes the mechanics of persuasion without contempt for the audience. The philosophers don't cancel the poets, they annotate them. Meanwhile, historians teach the city to remember without myth. Herodotus travels and listens, mixes marvels with inquiry. Thucydides strips the supernatural and gives us the Peloponnesian War as a pathology report. Fear, honor, interest, the triad that still explains the morning news. Pericles' funeral oration glows like a manifesto. The plague narrative is a mirror that fogs every time a new sickness arrives. Under all this thinking and staging runs religion as practice, not creed. Sacrifices timed to harvests. Mysteries that offer comfort without doctrine. Omens that are less about the future than about attention in the present. The city hums with contradictions and calls it balance. Then the spotlight widens. Alexander, tutored by Aristotle, marshed Greek language and style across Asia. The polis shrinks. The world expands. In the Hellenistic age, philosophy turns personal. Stoics teach logos and discipline. Align your will with nature's law. Accept fate without bitterness. Do your duty to the city of humankind. Epicureans build gardens where pleasure means absence of pain and friendship is the highest wealth. Skeptics suspend judgment and sleep better. Cynics move to barrels and declaim against pretense. The theater keeps playing. The audience changes address. What remains from these centuries isn't a single lesson but a toolkit. From tragedy, empathy for the limits of being right and a ritual way to grieve together. From comedy, the permission to puncture pomposity before it ossifies into policy. From philosophy, habits of asking and frameworks that make decency more likely. From history, the discipline to prefer evidence over legend when laws are on the line, and the humility to know legends still move hearts. West then. The smoke of Troy thins into a veil, and through it walks a man carrying an old father and a future he hasn't chosen. Aeneas. The Greeks sang of cleverness and quarrel. The Romans will sing of duty with a tight jaw. The myth crosses languages and becomes policy. Virgil, writing under Augustus, brokers the translation. The Aeneid opens with a mission pre-approved by prophecy. Found a city that will found a city that will call itself eternal. Juno hates him. Carthage is her darling. Rome her dread. Neptune calms the first storm the way a good Roman magistrate calms a riot, with dignity and fines implied. Venus, Aeneas's mother, keeps intervening with the softness gods reserve for their own. Aeneas is pious, a tricky word that means not pious in church, but in chain of command. The gods, father, family, fate. In Carthage, he meets Dido, a queen who built her city with brains and grit after fleeing a murderous brother. Love, Aphrodite's and Juno's joint sabotage arrives as a cave, a storm, and a social misunderstanding inflated into ceremony. For a time, they are married in everything but the words that would have made it safe. The gods remind Aeneas that Carthage isn't his address. Rome is. He leaves. Dido builds a fire of belongings and memory and steps into it, cursing him and seeding a mythic reason for Punic Wars later. Love curdled into geopolitics. In the underworld, Aeneas walks the Roman version of death's map. Rivers with clerks, fields of mythic geography, a place for the unjust, a place for the unburied, a place for those eaten by grief. He meets Anchises, who points not backward but forward, a parade of Roman souls waiting to be born kings, consuls, generals, and a boy whose early death will make a whole city weep, Marcellus. It's propaganda, yes, but also pathos. The weight of history put on one man's shoulders until his spine learns to carry law. Italy is not empty. It's a chessboard already in play. Aeneas lands in Latium, wins an alliance with King Latinus, and a promise of marriage to Lavinia. Juno stirs the pot through a fury named Alecto. War blooms. Turnus, prince of the Rutuli, stands up like a Greek hero caught in a Roman epic, brave, proud, doomed by the new rules of history. The fight becomes a referendum. Will Italy be built on old personal glory or new collective destiny? Aeneas keeps trying to treaty. The world keeps handing him spears. In the final duel, he kills Turnus after spotting Pallas's belt on the prince's hip. A boy's death remembered, mercy strangled by memory. The poem ends without a homecoming feast, abrupt, controversial. A reminder that Rome's story is always in medias res, duty outrunning comfort. From myth to mortar, Rome takes Greek gods and gives them Latin names and job descriptions. Zeus becomes Jupiter Optimus Maximus, a sky father with a temple committee and augurs who read birds like legal briefs. Hera becomes Juno Regina, patroness of marriage and the state, with peacocks and policy. Athena becomes Minerva, smart and artisanal. Aphrodite is Venus Genetrix, mother of the Julian line, an excuse for marble. Ares becomes Mars, domesticated into a father of Rome and a scheduled god of war. Hermes becomes Mercury the negotiator. Poseidon is Neptune, now more about ships than earthquakes. Hades, never a neighborly god, becomes Pluto, wealth of below. But Rome's soul is also archaic and local. The Lares and Penates, household gods who live on shelves and move with families. The genius of a man or the spirit of a place. Janus, two-faced, not as slur but as portfolio beginnings and gates, treaties, and mournings. Vesta's fire burns in the forum, tended by virgins whose chastity is civic infrastructure. If the flame goes out, the city flinches. The calendar is a legal document. Auspices matter. Magistrates watch the sky before convening the people. Omens don't dictate outcomes so much as choreograph timing. A bad chicken can delay a vote. A lightning strike can unseat a plan. It sounds quaint until you see how ritual creates consensus. Everyone can point to the sky and say, "We wait." Rome's other great myth is not a poem. It's a manual. The founding and growth of a city that preferred rules to heroes. Romulus and Remus, wolf-suckled, quarrel over omens and kill each other into a dynasty of one. Sabine women are abducted into wives and then broker peace between fathers and husbands, their bodies turned into borders and then into treaties. Kings rule, then get expelled for acting like kings. The Republic starts as a trauma response. No more Tarquins, no more blank checks. From there, Rome learns the habit that will build an empire. Iterate law. Struggle of the order's patricians versus plebeians produces tribunes with vetoes and the 12 tables, bronze law in the forum for all to read. Dictatorship is invented as a strictly timed emergency power, a lesson later forgotten with consequences named Caesar. Censors tally citizens and shame morals. Consuls share power in pairs. The state becomes a machine that runs on offices with expiration dates. Virtues, gravitas, pietas, virtue, weight, earn private morals. Their job requirements. Roads extend Rome's nerves. Milestones are memos. Aqueducts make abundance visible. Legions march in a grid that can survive a cut. Camps fold into cities. Citizenship becomes a prize, then a club, then a strategy. Conquer, incorporate, tax, recruit, rinse, repeat. When Greek culture arrives, captured libraries, captive tutors, Rome blushes, then boasts about its new polish. Greece, captured her savage conqueror, Horace quips, and the forum nods while buying more statues. Religion scales with the state. Triumphs parade gods and generals down avenues lined with awe, a civic liturgy of power. The imperial cult Augustus as father of the country, peace personified as an altar with children and bounty carved in marble, turns politics into ritual. Augustus wraps himself in myth like a cloak that also warms others. He is Aeneas's heir, Venus's grandson, Romulus without the fratricide. The Arapacis hums with propaganda that manages to be beautiful and sincere, the way good propaganda tends to be. Not all inherit smoothly. Stoicism finds a home in stern Roman minds. Cato the Younger dying on his own terms. Seneca trying to reconcile Nero with reason. Marcus Aurelius writing himself into patience between campaigns. Epicureanism survives in gardens and poems. Lucretius sings the physics and peace of atoms in the Rerum Natura, a hymn to a universe without tantrum-prone gods. These philosophies leaven the Roman loaf, offering personal ethics under public weight. The empire stretches until it thins. Borders harden. Emperors get strange. Armies make and unmake Caesars like weather changes. Christianity arrives not as a policy, but as a rumor that endurance is holier than sacrifice and resurrection is better news than victory. Persecutions burn. Conversions multiply. Constantine legalizes. Theodosius officializes. The old gods don't disappear so much as become architecture and idiom. Days of the week, months, metaphors, while churches repurpose basilicas and bishops learn senatorial poise. Myth is not abolished. It is archived in saints, festivals, and a calendar that keeps holy days next to harvest days. And yet the Greek thread never snaps. Roman poets keep cribbing Homer and glossing him with Latin rhythm. Ovid, in exile, writes metamorphoses that make old myths portable, ready for Middle Ages painters and Renaissance sculptors to pick up like tools. Virgil's pastoral shepherds play flutes that will become Christian allegory without even changing key. When Rome falls in one place, it shifts in another. Byzantium, Latin Christendom, Islamic scholarship preserving Aristotle, each inheriting and editing the kit. So what is Rome's myth in one line? That law can domesticate destiny. Aeneas doesn't outwit the gods. He outlasts himself, trading private want for public work until the work becomes a world. The cost is visible. Dio's pyre flickers on every marble surface if you look long enough. The gain is also visible: roads that still surface under modern wheels, words that still adjudicate disputes, a calendar that still names our months after emperors and storms. Myths don't end. They change address. After Rome, the old stories start living second lives painted on chapel walls, whispered in cloisters, annotated by scholars, then shouted back into daylight by artists who recognize themselves in the old shapes. In the early medieval centuries, monasteries keep the embers. Scribes copy Virgil and Ovid between songs. The church, wary and pragmatic, absorbs what it can translate. Aeneas becomes a model of duty minus his pagan sacrifices. Hercules is reread as fortitude wrestling vice. Ulysses, Latin for Odysseus, becomes a cautionary figure, clever past the point of wisdom. Allegory is the passport. A nymph can stand for a virtue, a monster for a sin. The pagan gods are sometimes demoted to demons, sometimes promoted to metaphors, often shelved as literature with a moral tucked in the margin. Dante, at the hinge of medieval and early modern, writes a map big enough to fit both covenants and both canons. In the Divine Comedy, Virgil guides him through hell and purgatory. The pagan poet granted the role of reason, leading a Christian soul until grace must take over. Ulysses appears in the Inferno, not as a homesick husband, but as the restless mind that sailed beyond the pillars of Hercules to chase knowledge with no limit but death. It's a rebuke and a tribute. Dante loves the ancients enough to argue them into his theology. Then, the Renaissance throws open shutters. Florence, Rome, Venice cities become workshops where antiquity is quarried for style, story, and stance. Botticelli paints Venus rising on a shell. Pagan, yes, but also an essay about beauty as birthright. Michelangelo carves Greek muscle onto Hebrew heroes and sires a David who looks like he could bench press a city-state. Raphael's School of Athens places Plato and Aristotle under a Roman arch, while Heraclitus borrows the brooding face of Michelangelo. A family portrait of thought into gas.ists dig through monastic libraries for lost texts the way archaeologists sift ruins. They find Lucretius's atoms, rediscovering a material cosmos that will fertilize science. They edit and argue. Petrarch wrestles with his Augustinian conscience. Erasmus annotates both scripture and Seneca with the same fine brush. Printing presses multiply myths like spring hares. On stage, the old plots step into new shoes. Shakespeare threads Troy through his histories and tragedies. Troilus and Cressida is a brilliant autopsy of heroism, while Antony and Cleopatra lets Roman duty and Egyptian desire burn each other into poetry. Across the channel, Molière and Racine domesticate gods into salons. Phaedra is Euripides with a French conscience. Opera gives myth a soundtrack. Monteverdi's Orfeo, Gluck's Orpheus, and Eurydice music, discovering that descent and return are already arias in waiting. The Enlightenment trims miracles and keeps morals. Painters neoclassicize David's Brutus, condemns his sons for the Republic, a Roman parable in revolutionary Paris. Gibbon writes Rome's decline with a cool gaze and warm prose, treating Christian and pagan as historical actors more than divine agents. Myth becomes a shared language for politics republics, drape themselves in togas, eagles perch on standards again, fasces reappear as symbols of authority long before Mussolini misreads them. Romanticism rebels against cool reason and runs back into the woods. Goethe's Faust bargains like a modern Orpheus. Byron swaggers in Achilles' boots. Keats writes to the Grecian urn and hears beauty is truth as a line only a civilization this layered could utter. Shelley's Prometheus Unbound frees the Titan from his rock as a metaphor for revolution and imagination. Painters flood canvases with mythic storms and swoons Delacroix's color riots. Turner drowns Icarus in light. Victorian scholars systematize while poets personalize. Bulfinch and Graves compile handbooks that turn Greek and Roman myth into a curriculum you can shelf. Tennyson in Ulysses speaks the modern soul's restlessness. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. Meanwhile, archaeology steps onto the stage with a trowel and swagger. Schliemann digs at Hesalic, finds a city that lets the world say Troy with fewer disclaimers. Evans unearths Knossos and a civilization with bull-leaping frescoes to make Theseus blink. Myth gains strata. The Bronze Age whispers beneath classical marble. Modernism shatters and reassembles. Joyce makes Ulysses a day in Dublin episodes from Homer folded into errands, epiphanies, and lusted lunches. Eliot's The Wasteland quotes Tiresias, fragments of myth, as scaffolding for a world after war. Psychoanalysis mines the old stories for family blueprints. Oedipus becomes a syndrome, Electra a complex, Narcissus a diagnosis. Myth shrinks into the self without losing scale. Cinema learns quickly, but heroes sell. Ray Harryhausen animates Talos and Medusa into childhood nightmares. Pasolini retells Oedipus with dust and drums. Later, myth becomes a franchise engine. Clash of the Titans twice. Disney's Hercules with gospel choirs. Wonder Woman strolling out of the Masira, a feminist refit of Amazons. Television serializes gods into office politics, American Gods. Percy Jackson for younger hearts. Hadestown puts Orpheus in a New Orleans factory with a chorus that knows how Union songs and underworlds rhyme. Meanwhile, scholarship keeps arguing usefully. Feminist retellings hand the mic to women who were once plot devices, Madeline Miller's Circe in Song of Achilles. Pat Barker's The Silence of the Girls. Natalie Haynes's A Thousand Ships. Post-colonial readings ask whose myths those were and whose they became when empires moved them. Queer readings find eros where the commentaries once looked away. In courts and clinics, names endure as shorthand. Media headlines custody battles. Narcissus diagnoses a presidency. Achilles' heel becomes a medical term and a sports commentary cliché in one breath. Companies name themselves after Mercury when they ship and Nike when they sell speed. Space programs resurrect Apollo and Artemis for rockets as if to tell the sky it's a sequel. Why do these stories last? 3 reasons, at least. Architecture. They're built from vivid, portable units, labors, riddles, voyages, taboos. Bargains that can be rearranged without collapse. Ambiguity. No official scripture locks them. Competing versions invite reinterpretation. Each age picks a facet and polishes it to see itself. Utility. They teach and warn without requiring belief. Hospitality matters. Pride trips. Love complicates. Fate feels like the name we give to consequences we didn't intend. They also offer a toolkit for making new myths. Superheroes are city-state gods with capes and trauma. Sci-fi epics are voyage cycles with better engines. Fantasy replaced the Titanomachy every few trilogies with new sigils. Even our secular saints wear laurel by other names. Noble medals, championship rings, follower counts crowned in blue check marks. Yet the best retellings remember the costs. Aeneas leaves Dido and builds a state, and the poem winces. Odysseus kills the suitors and earns a fragile peace that needs a goddess to hold. Antigone is buried alive because a city can be lawful and wrong. Prometheus brings fire and suffers. Those tensions keep the stories honest. A short modern myth in old clothes. Once, not long ago, a city ran on code the way old cities ran on grain. The servers hummed like beehives. People paid, learned, dated, voted, healed through systems that were invisible until they failed. The architects told themselves they were neutral. The shareholders told themselves they were necessary. The users told themselves they were free. Prometheus worked there under another name. A senior engineer with a habit of staying late and a weakness for what if. He didn't steal fire. He open-sourced a tool that made black boxes interpretable heat maps of bias, logs that wouldn't lie, dashboards that surfaced the decisions no one wanted to own. He tucked it into a public repository like a fennel stalk into which he had hidden a live ember. Overnight, clinics used it to catch models that sorted patients by zip code instead of need. Judges saw risk scores that mirrored old prejudices. Hiring funnels went translucent. The city glowed a little warmer. Zeus wore a blazer and sent emails. "This is proprietary," the subject line said. Policies fell like hail. Prometheus was locked out of his accounts, sued, audited, and offered a soft landing if he would apologize in a language that erased the point. He didn't. His punishment was not eagles, but meetings. The kind where you cannot leave, where your words are fed upon and grow back overnight. where you learn that immortality isn't required for suffering to repeat. Down the hall worked Antigone, a compliance officer whose job description was a warning label written by lawyers. She read the documents nobody read and found a clause that forbade reporting certain failures to the people who would be hurt by them. "It keeps us agile," her manager said. "It keeps us safe," said the general counsel. She thought of her brother, real or metaphorical, someone already lost to a policy that made sense in the boardroom and none in the world. She printed the clause. She walked it to a journalist with a voice like a chorus and a deadline like a drum. The story landed. The company tried to bury her. She said the line that sounds ancient in every age. "Your rule is not strong enough to overrule the unwritten laws of decency." They sealed her in a performance improvement plan. She refused to die quietly. Odysseus lived in a small apartment with a plant he kept forgetting to water and a partner whose patience was a loom. His voyage never left the bus routes. Cyclopes were monopolies that offered one door and one eye that watched everything. Sirens were notifications, knowledge without context, urgency without mercy. He wanted to listen and live, so he tied himself to routines and gave his passwords to a friend who would say no for him when he could not. Scylla and Charybdis were the two shifts he worked to afford time with his kid. He lost hours either way. The cattle of the sun were savings he swore never to touch. Then a car broke, then a tooth. He did what men do in myths and modernity. He kept going. Some mornings the mast was a coffee cup. At home, Penelope ran the house on spreadsheets and grace. She unraveled budgets at night and rewove them by day. Suitors didn't drink from her cups. They sat in her inbox. Offers, warnings, temptations, threats, a long siege of the attention. She set tests of reality. Show me, not tell me, and let most of the world fail them. When Odysseus finally came through the door late and ordinary, she didn't swoon. She asked him about a small thing only they shared. He answered as if he had been there all along. The plant revived. Above them, the gods had rebranded as platforms and protocols. Hermes moved money with Apis. Athena took the form of a municipal clerk who knew how to route permits through a labyrinth without losing them. Dionysus ran the community theater and the recovery group, each teaching masks that told the truth. Hestia was still a stove gas or electric. Doesn't matter around which people forgave each other and made plans. Ares was trending. Apollo posted figures. Artemis organized a night run for women who wanted to move without being afraid. Demeter ran the food co-op. Persephone moderated the grief group in the basement where the light was kind. The Furies were still around, now called consequences. They woke when people pretended externalities were fiction. Athena still had a chord in her. The neighborhood council, the public hearing, the classroom where someone learned how to argue without hating. The verdicts were neat. They were better than knives. One day, the city held a festival not to a god, but to a verb, repair. People brought broken things, bikes, code, friendships. The rule was simple. You could only fix what you were willing to teach someone else to fix next time. Children soldered. Elders remembered. The air smelled like tin and coffee. Someone told the story of how Prometheus forked the repo. Someone else told the story of how Antigone printed the clause. Someone sang a sea shanty about public transit. A chorus of strangers hummed along until they weren't strangers. At sunset, an old man stood and said that myths are not fossils. They're tools. Use them, he said, to pry open stuck doors. Use them to name the weather inside you. Use them to warn yourselves before the gods have to. He raised a cup clay, cracked, mended with gold, and the crack shone brighter than the glaze. The city went on the way cities do, imperfect, argued, improved in places, betrayed in others, seeded with rituals that made mercy practical. The gods, such as they were, nodded like weather changing. Hope didn't live sealed in a jar. It lived in calendars and group chats, in watchwords like Xenia translated into mutual aid, in benches under trees where people were safer together than apart.